Hello and welcome to fSobriety, a podcast where myself, James Hamilton, and my co-host, Craig Woods, talk about, dissect, and generally discuss pop culture, TV, movies, that sort of thing. And with me today, as always, is my co-host, Craig Woods.
Hello everyone, and hello James. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I can't believe I started the episode.
I can't believe you did either. You did a sterling job.
I mean, that was the third attempt at me starting the episode. The other two have been edited out. But I think we can see why you're usually the one to start the episodes.
Well, we may or may not revert to type on the next episode. I guess we'll see.
Yes. So, how have you been, Craig?
I've been okay. I've just been working crazy shifts and, dealing with life in not quite full-on lockdown or whatever we are at right now. What stage are we at, James?
Right now we're at the stage where it's lockdown with a question mark at the end, so it's lockdown?
Right, got it. Yeah, that's good to know.
The following stage is an emphatic lockdown.
To be fair, I've been kind of living my life for the past 6 months, just taking it for granted that everything is still in lockdown, and that way I could never go wrong. I just don't ever leave my house, basically. James, what are we talking about today? I've got a feeling we're changing things up a little.
We are. So, episode 1 was a general chat about the things that we like, and the last few episodes have been based around different TV shows. However, we don't want to give the impression that we're just a couple of slobs who do nothing but watch TV.
That would be crazy.
We're also slobs who sometimes listen to music, and on this episode we are going to be discussing not one but two of our favourite musical artists.
That's right, and hopefully there are people, some of you out there are totally up for that kind of thing, and if you've read the episode description, which I assume most of you do before clicking on podcast, because otherwise you're a crazy dangerous person and probably very dangerous to know, then I guess you're okay with that.
I hope so. Do people read podcast descriptions? I just usually go lucky dip.
That's far too crazy for me, James. As always, James, we're here both with drinks in hand.
Yes.
What are you drinking this evening?
This evening I am drinking an Argentinian Malbec.
Sweet.
I'm joining you in South America.
Well, there you go. It's like you've finally grown up.
It's Trevento, Argentina, Reserve Malbec, 2019 Mendoza. There's all the things that it says on the label.
Spoken like a true expert.
And what I really like about this Malbec is that it's got a screw top.
That's how you can tell it's classy.
Yep. How about yourself? What have you got from the bar this evening?
I have got some Antigua Porteño Colombian rum. And James, can you guess why I am drinking Colombian rum?
Because you're a pirate now?
That, and also it is thematically relevant to what I am going to be talking about.
Ah, please do explain the connection.
So, on this podcast, I am going to be talking a lot about Jessie Reyez, who I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, or at least 50% of the title intrigued you, then you know that already. And you're probably here because you're quite interested in her too. I have had a metaphorical love affair, not a literal one, with Jessie Reyez for about 4 years. Yeah, move on from that.
This isn't a place to air your fantasies, Craig. This is a fact-based podcast.
I know, I must remind myself of that. And so, in preparation for this podcast, I realised that I do have an awful lot to say about Jessie Reyez, and I'm glad that I've got this platform that I've provided for myself in order to do that.
Speaking as someone who has been close friends with you for quite some time, I can agree that you do have a lot to say about Jessie Reyez. Would you describe yourself as one of her top fans?
Not only would I describe myself that way, I believe Mark Zuckerberg would also testify in court to that effect.
Fantastic. There's a guy whose opinion you can trust.
Right, exactly. He's well known for his benevolent interventions in culture and democracy.
Well, it's because he's trying to understand how humans think.
Exactly.
So that one day he can hope to become human himself.
One day he can understand what it means to truly be a top fan.
So yeah, in case anyone's unfamiliar with the terminology, Facebook hands out, are they like badges, awards, for people who are top fans of pages and artists. And Craig earned himself the stripes, the proof needed to show that he is a top fan of Jessie Reyez.
Mm-hmm. And the levels of privilege that affords me are just out of this world. My life has never been the same since.
Well, coincidentally, almost as if it were planned by us, this evening I will also be discussing a musical artist that I have a great deal of affection for. A similarly named artist, another Jessie, but Jessie with a Y.
Why though?
It's a distinct difference. Jessy Lanza, the Canadian electro-pop composer and singer.
2 Jessies, 2 Canadians. What are the odds?
A tale of 2 Jessies. Can you believe it?
Cynics might say we only agreed on these 2 artists just so that we could make a pun out of the episode title. Full disclosure, I actually suggested this format to you, James, just a few short days ago. I think we should be upfront about this because we knew we were going to talk about music a lot, and if you have already listened to our previous episodes, then you already know that we have a habit of segueing off. Sometimes I'd like to think in quite a comical fashion to chats about music. So I figured we might as well capitalise on that and just have the occasional episodes that are purely just music focused. And when I made the suggestion, I actually had it in my mind that this episode I was going to talk about Rico and Nasty, because I'm really digging Rico and Nasty right now. I've liked her for a long time, but for whatever reason she's just pushing my buttons right now, and she's about to drop an album shortly. And I had all these ideas of what I was going to discuss on the episode, but then I thought to myself, well, I better talk this through with James first and see what he thinks about the format. And you were all about the format, but then when I suggested, somewhere down the line we could do one where I talk about Jessie Reyez, you talk about Jessy Lanza, and we can call it
Jessy and Jessier.
And you immediately leapt in at that, and so we are. This is what we're doing.
So I suppose the listening public will have to wait for our Rico Nasty / Fiona Apple podcast further down the line.
That could be the next one.
Once we think of an appropriate pun for the title, we're golden.
Right. That's got to be the parameters from now on, otherwise it cannot happen. It's got to be the pun challenge. Yeah, but there's a whole list of artists I'm looking forward to having these kind of discussion-based podcasts about, so hopefully this will turn out to be a pretty decent format that some of you out there will enjoy. And with that said, shall we crack on?
Let's do it. Wait, is this an episode? No.
Is this an episode of fSobriety?
Don't make me have to come up with a new intro. So for those listeners who may not be familiar with Jessie Reyez, I myself am somewhat familiar with Jessie Reyez's music and her as a personality. Well, it's maybe something we'll talk about later. You and I were both going to go and see Jessie Reyez before everything went to shit. But
yep.
I don't know anyone who likes Jessie Reyez quite as much as you do. As we mentioned, you have the top fan status, so why don't you tell us how you discovered Jessie Reyez's existence and her music in general to start with?
Well, it's a journey. So the purpose of this podcast really is not just to fangirl for the sake of fangirling, although don't worry, there's going to be plenty of that if that's your thing, but to kind of place each artist we're talking about in the sense of why they're important to the current moment. And it was on that basis that when I realised we were going to do this episode, I had so much to say about this. And right from the off, when I first heard Jessie Reyez, it was an immediate visceral reaction, and it was actually on a Spotify playlist. In fact, I don't think it was even a playlist. I think it was one of those when your music stops and then Spotify just starts playing random stuff. And it was in 2016, and she only had released the one song at that point, which was Figures. And within the opening verse of that song, the thing that really struck me immediately was the voice. I was like, wow, her voice is incredible. The voice is so unusual for that kind of genre of music, and the production on that song, it is quite lush in that sort of contemporary R&B type way, but it does have this, it has the kind of acoustic guitar sound that's, the chords are very like they're lifted from some form of folk music, and there's a little hint of blues in there. And it was just an interesting mix of sounds to my ear at the time, and it made my ears prick up. There was only that one song available for quite a while after I'd heard it, and to be honest, I did not listen to it constantly, but I liked it enough that I'd shoved it in several playlists. And then I think the second song I heard, I was going to say it was Fuck It, but actually it wasn't. I think it was actually Shutter Island, which is sort of similar. That one did not strike me in quite the same way. I did quite like it, but it didn't electrify me in the way as that the EP finally did when it arrived. When our Kiddo EP landed in 2017, Fuck It is the first track on it. And man, it just blew me away. That song, in so many ways, it is almost like a case study in what all of her music does. Like, if you look at her entire discography so far, that song is kind of a microcosm of all the things she's doing. It is a breakup song, and it has a really angry, kind of violent impetus behind it, but the production is still so lush, and her voice, man, that was of the 3 songs I'd heard so far, that was the one in which I thought, no, her voice comes from another planet. And I was really struck then by the way in which she manipulates her voice in ways that perhaps it's not naturally meant to go. And it's not the kind of thing, I think I've said this to you before, normally with like R&B, soul music and contemporary pop music generally, I tend to like subtler vocal styles. Like when it comes to things like jazz and all that kind of thing, I'll gladly listen to the most mannered vocalist there is, you know. But when it comes to like R&B pop music, I tend to just favour a more subtle vocal. I tend to favour the more kind of Georgia Smith end of the spectrum.
Oh yeah.
And in fact, Georgia Smith is a great example of this, because Georgia Smith is an effortless vocalist. You never hear any effort at all in Georgia Smith's delivery. And that's normally what I like in that kind of genre. So Jessie Reyez was the polar opposite of that. There are times you really hear her straining her voice and almost beating it to death in some places, which is cool for jazz and cool for metal and stuff like that, but it's not the kind of thing I normally look for in this genre. I don't know what it was. There's just something about the mix of elements, though, with the particular character of her voice and the really unusual phrasing that she does. And then the lyrical content of her songs is just so compelling in so many ways, which I'll get into in a bit. But yeah, those were the first experiences, and then I just immersed myself in that Kiddo EP, and there's like 7 tracks on that EP, and I could not stop spinning that EP for like over a year until she finally released another song.
So did she release those first 2 tracks as like individual singles, and then
the
EP following? Did she self-release stuff, or did she get signed at a point when, like, between the singles and the EP?
The first one, I believe, was self-released. But yeah, she was signed by the time Kiddo came out.
Right. Cool. It's nice to see that kind of progression, career-wise as well as musically, you know?
True. I don't think it happens, though, without a superhuman level of work ethic, which is something that's going to become a recurring theme as I continue talking here. After that EP was released and I could not stop listening to it, I became obsessed with her, as you know. Mm-hmm. And I just would listen to any interview I could find, read any interview I could find. Her background is really interesting, and it's integral to who she is as an artist. And it's a big part of the reason why, that will lead to the reasons why I think she is one of the most relevant artists right now, and why she is so culturally crucial to the present moment in which we live. So Jessie Reyez, if you don't know, is Colombian-Canadian, and she's the child of Colombian immigrants. And both her parents actually emigrated to Canada separately, and they met in Canada. Now, I don't want to have to go into too much about the circumstances of what their emigration, why it happened, how it happened. All I can say is the vast majority of people from Latin America who make these kind of emigrations to Canada and the US do so under the most horrific conditions, and for reasons that they're often taking their lives in their hands by even making these journeys, and the only reason they do it is because where they are situated is worse, because that's the only reason anybody would make one of those journeys. And there are so many stories like this, and I'm not going to make a big sermon about this, but it has to be mentioned, because one thing I cannot stand whenever, and I've seen it so many times when people talk about Jessie Reyez's background, or indeed any Latin American artist's background, they always gloss over this part and give the impression that Colombia in this case, but it could be anywhere in Latin America or almost anywhere, is just some kind of bad place where bad stuff happens. There are very real reasons as to why these things happen. Colombia, for example, has been in a state of inner conflict since the early 60s, and there are so many other Latin American countries that have been going through similar kinds of things, and all of these things really stem from, on the one hand, neoliberal economic policies that have been imposed on these countries, and also going back to the 50s and 60s, the Cold War push by the US to just obliterate any form of socialism or communism. And, Latin America, many places in Latin America were hotbeds for that. And of course, Latin America is also very resource rich. And so, the US has done its best to destabilize these regions, and then with neoliberal policies, basically just attain that wealth for itself. And that has resulted in mass destabilization. And so you get all kinds of civil war, you get all kinds of, horrors of the likes which we cannot even imagine. I mean, we are relatively privileged where we live. I think it's important to mention that, because I guess I just don't like the way that whenever we're talking about these origin stories about artists, that it's just kind of regarded as a sort of, that these things exist in a vacuum. One of the things I'm going to come to talk about is the way in which Jessie Reyez's art and her persona do speak in a really crucial way to the culture in which she now exists, and within which she creates her art, and in which she is kind of holding up a mirror to the culture that caused her own origins in a way. And, she's not alone in this. This is true of many Latin American immigrant artists.
What part of Canada was she born in?
She was born in Toronto.
Right.
And both her parents met in Toronto. And they both, they'd both come there having, gone through similar experiences. For anybody who wants to know more about this or does not understand what I'm talking about, and if you're sitting there thinking, this makes no sense, the USA has never been at war with Colombia, for example, all I can say, guys, is read a fucking book. There are many books to read. Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano is a good place to start. Beneath the United States by Lars Schultz. Solidarity, Latin America and the US Left in the Era of Human Rights by Steve Striffler. That's also a good one. I will make a short reading list, actually, that I'm going to put in the episode description. Because these things are definitely important, and on another podcast I would love to talk about this more, but I have to move on. Now, her father's background is really interesting though. So her father was born and raised in Cali, which is in southwest Colombia, and his own mother died when he was less than a year old, and he was raised by his father along with his two sisters, but then his dad died when he was 16, and then when he was still very young, that's when he moved to Canada, where he had Jessie's older brother, but then Jessie's older brother's mother died also, and so he was then raising kids alone, and then he met the woman who would become Jessie's mother in Toronto. So already there is this recurring theme of just escaping one hardship after another, only for to this shadow of death just to keep returning. And it's I hate to use this because it almost sounds like I'm making light of it. I'm definitely not doing that, but it is the kind of thing that you would read in a Latin American novel from the mid-20th century. And the way Jessie describes it whenever she's talking about her father, it is a lot like that. And there are several interviews where she does go into more detail about this, but there's always crucial details that she omits. So there's obviously some things that she's not particularly comfortable revealing, but the stuff she is comfortable talking about, she talks about it a lot. And so she does tend to rhyme off these anecdotes and has a really ingenious way of sweeping them past the interviewer so that the interviewer cannot ask any follow-up questions. And I've noticed she does this a lot. But anyway, among the things that I have learned about her background is her dad, when he was in Toronto, I'm not entirely sure what kind of company he worked for, but he did some kind of manual labour job. And he was with the same company for like 20 years, working all the hours he could possibly work. And Jessie remembers her dad when she was upset that they couldn't afford a scooter. And Jessie, as a kid, really wanted a scooter because other kids in her neighbourhood had scooters. And so her dad basically just gathered a bunch of materials and spent hours building one and then painted it the colours of the Colombian flag. I said, there you go, there's a scooter. And Jessie, when she's remembering this, she says, I was the most horrible kid because I hated it.
It's like, can I get McDonald's? We have McDonald's at home.
Right, exactly. But, and this is the kind of classic story you hear a lot about immigrant communities. And it's But it brings it home to the reason that's almost become a cliche in popular culture is because this is reality for a lot of people. That is just how it goes. And, you know, when you're a first generation child of immigrants, you do, I guess, grow up with that idea that you know, whatever your parents went through before you're old enough to understand it properly, it's like a different world, and you don't really feel any particular impetus to understand it probably until you're a bit older, and so it's impossible to contextualize. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because Jessie in her lyrics makes so many references to the guilt she feels about this, and the relationship which she has with her parents now. Her parents actually tour with her constantly. Oh. She's extremely close with her parents. And she makes it clear in pretty much every interview that there's whatever she can do for them will never be enough. Mm-hmm. Because after everything they went through, and then the way she feels she treated them when she was a kid, she's like, they deserve more than I can ever give them, no matter what I give them. And there is that sense of there being a debt that she can never repay kind of thing. And it's almost like a Catholic guilt thing, which obviously is a thing in her background as well, as it is for most Latin Americans. But yeah, it is part of the whole. It is part of the whole tapestry. Her mother, incidentally, was a school teacher, and had been a school teacher in Colombia. Canada does not recognize Colombian diplomas, so when she arrived in Colombia, she could not be a teacher, which is crazy to think about. So she ended up starting a daycare center, and Jessie has memories of just being surrounded by tons of other kids who at a very young age were all speaking Spanish because they were hearing her mother speak Spanish around them, which is pretty great.
That's pretty amazing.
As a child, and this is great stuff because I think this informs so much of what I think is Jessie's artistic vision and why I think she's such an important artist. As a child, at family parties, one of the things she would do was when she was just learning about music and getting enthusiastic about music, she would turn up in the middle of family parties when she was supposed to have gone to bed, dressed as Celia Cruz, and would sing like Celia Cruz. Do you know who Celia Cruz is?
I do, yes.
Yeah, and so for those who don't know, Celia Cruz was a black Cuban singer, a kind of salsa singer. It was massively popular all over Latin America. And so she would come in, and that was her way of being able to stay up late because everybody loved it so much. Now, if you know anything about Celia Cruz's history, it's impossible to overstate the importance of Celia Cruz to a lot of Latin Americans, and particularly non-white Latin Americans. She has a huge place in that culture, and I think something Jessie does in her art a lot is channel kind of classical elements of Latin American culture in an entirely contemporary, accessible way. And I just think it's interesting to note that she was even doing that as a kid. Another thing to note here, and this is one of my favourite Jessie Reyez obscure details, and I only ever heard her mention this in one interview, but she would play games of church. And an interviewer said, "What do you mean by play games of church?" And she said, "I would get my aunts and uncles, her tios and tias, into the room, and I would put them through mass." And I would just get all the crackers from the cupboard, and I would just give them out as if they were wafers, and it used to drive my mother insane because we would end up having no crackers left, which is amazing. And what I love about that is one thing I'm going to talk about in a bit is there's this real streak in Jessie Reyez's work, and one of the things that really makes it compelling is this mixture of the sacred and the profane, and the idea of Jessie as a kid just performing sacraments as if it was a game, as if it was entertainment, is pretty much it's a nice prefiguring metaphor for the kind of thing she does now. Now, obviously, you know, the Catholic Church is a huge thing in most Latin American people's lives. It's kind of inescapable. It's just a massive part of the culture. And there is that communal aspect and that kind of the idea of the community come together and performing rites together. I feel like that's still a big thing in her art as well. One of the things she does quite a lot is she will post on social media and ask fans, what do you want me to write a song about? And she principally does it as a mean to combat writer's block, she has said, but I do kind of feel that it is part of this communal process. to make everything collaborative, to make everything kind of in line with the creative spirit. By the way, it's also kind of the ultimate DIY grassroots ethos taken to its logical conclusion when you think about it.
Well, in terms of like inclusivity and collaboration, it doesn't get
100%,
much more
yeah.
collaborative than taking cues from your own audience and your own fan base to be like, help me write these songs, tell me what to write about. That's beautiful.
Totally. She actually, like, she has a song about South Park just because somebody said write a song about South Park.
That's amazing.
And stuff like that. And she's there's like a lot of artists, I imagine, you know, they've all got a vault of stuff that they'll just never release. But she says she's got hundreds of songs now, and it's just so many of them are just from people suggesting things. And she's got this Dropbox that's just full of these songs. And all of these, she says, are necessary for her to continue creating. Because if she stops creating, then, you know, who knows what could happen. But it's pretty great. She actually says, I'll get a good quote here from her. One of the reasons she does this is because she doesn't always have the time now to just randomly create stuff in the same way that she did. Because now she's, as an independent artist, even though she's signed to a record label now, being an artist now is a totally different thing for what it was 20, 30 years ago. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, your record label used to handle so much of the stuff, whereas now an artist is kind of, it's demanded of you to be kind of your own salesman in a way, and be your own publicist, because you've got to be active on social media and all this kind of thing. And also, if you want to be hands-on with your art, if you want to have total creative control, it does mean you have much less time to do a lot of the other things that you maybe want to do. But she says here, there's a quote where she says, the silver lining of not being successful is you have the freedom to just create constantly. And one of the reasons she does this thing where she just gets people to give her ideas for songs is that she never has to sit and worry about and find time to do it, because other people can just bring her the ideas. And she can have fun creating them, and from them, you know, new ideas can spring. So to go back to her background a wee bit, she says music came into her life really at 4 years old, and you'll like this, James. The first music she got into was reggae.
Is this an episode of
No, we are not doing that. not this episode. But she was listening to a lot of cumbia and salsa and you know, all the kind of Latin American folk forms that our parents were into, so there's that influence as well. But she started writing poetry from a young age, and I think you can tell that she was a poet before she became a songwriter.
It's visible in her lyrics that she's someone who has spent a long time working on kind of lyrical composition. She had one teacher who was her 7th grade teacher who supported her during her singing creativity, and she talks about this a lot because she says it was the one teacher that had any time for her, because by her own admission she was a terrible school student, and she was a bit of a menace and was constantly in trouble at school. And so the fact that this one teacher really took the time to nurture her talent is something that she talks about constantly. And this teacher went out of her way to call Jessie's parents at one point just to tell them that Jessie had aced this poetry project, and to let them know that, you know, Jessie actually has talent in writing, you know, so just so you know, there is something good going on. It was just to give them some good news for a change, because usually, as Jessie puts it, any time the phone rang, it was usually bad news from the school. And interestingly, her parents had never read her poetry because she wrote poetry in English, because obviously it was for her English class at school, and they spoke Spanish at home. So it was just never part of the conversation. So even though our parents can speak English, it just wasn't ever part of the conversation at home. It was never, you know, she was never going to let them hear what she'd written in English, because she says it just felt strange to do that. So she actually remembers meeting up with that teacher much later, and the teacher asked her if she was going to go to college. And at this time, this is when Jessie Reyez had decided, now I'm just going to pursue a career in music. And apparently the colour drained from this teacher's face, as if, oh no, you're not really going to do that. It's because the teacher just suddenly panicked, as if, you know, she just suddenly did not have the confidence to back up all these things that she told Jessie to do about following her passion. And Jessie had to be the one to say, it'll be fine, it's all right, it'll work out. Interestingly, her parents had to wait 16 years for visa approval to live in the US, because Canada was not their first choice. They actually wanted to live in the US. 16 years, man. Can you imagine that? And the only reason they lived in Canada for so long because they were waiting to see if they could get a visa for the US.
they ended up finally moving to Florida, and it's like, why would you move from Canada to Florida? But, and Jessie herself says that, but that's just the way it was. But they were there for only, I'm not sure for how long, but a short time for her parents. She's unclear about this, so I don't know what the situation was here, but for some reason her parents ended up having to return to Canada. Jessie stayed in Florida, though, where she tended a bar. She eventually did return to Toronto, where she was helped by this community outreach program for disadvantaged young people. And so that's really where she started to develop a kind of support network. Because at this time she was busking on the street, and when she wasn't doing that, she was tending a bar, and that was her life for a good couple of years. This is part and parcel of the work ethic I was mentioning earlier. Like, right away, she's just constantly working in the most unglamorous ways, and considering her parents' background, there is this long, that is just the narrative of her life, and it's just a continuation of what her parents do. And she is somebody who made it happen because she just kept working. I mean, she is outrageously talented, but how many talented people don't make it? I'm sure we know a few in real life, right? And I'm not suggesting those people didn't work hard enough, because the point is, it's hard to do this. There has to be some superhuman level of work ethic to be able to go through all of this, because it can be extremely difficult to just physically and mentally to just keep yourself going through that kind of thing before you just kind of give up. I mean, I know plenty of people well who've just given up because it just becomes too difficult.
You can have all the talent in the world, which she does, to be fair, and like a superhuman work ethic, which she does, but sometimes you just need that like little bit of luck.
Yeah,
on top, or just like a little bit of chance for someone to hear something and for it to make a difference. Maybe not so much now, well, in fact, even possibly more so nowadays, because of the quote-unquote democratization of culture. It's much easier to get your stuff out there, but because it's much easier to get your stuff out there, the music industry at grassroots level is so saturated that even though it's easier to get your stuff out there, to get it noticed is more difficult, and that's where I guess you need that element of chance combined with your work ethic and talent for it to be noticed.
There has to be some kind of support network, and I think this is where it turns around for Jessie, is when she has that community outreach program, because she herself says, if it hadn't been for that, she's not sure what would have happened. So she did have this network that did support her, and she was able to kind of get a foundation under her at that point. She has some great stories about this period. I'm not going to get too much of them, or we will be here all night because there are so many. Jessie the Raconteur. Yeah, there's so many great stories. When she was first trying to publicise herself online, one of the things she would do is post MP3s of one of her songs on Twitter, but put it up with a clickbait title. It would be something like the one she uses quite a lot. So this must be true. She must have done this. Footage here of the weekend kissing strippers. And she said that one got so much traction that the song got so many plays because people just became curious and clicked play on it. And she kept spamming people on Facebook with that link. And yeah, she has tons of stories like that. What's crazy to me though is that during this time, she was working at the Florida bar for standard money at weekends, and she was flying back to Toronto during the week to pursue music, because it's the only support network she had at that point. That is mental, man. Yeah. And I've got notes here about this, and I've written in big block capitals, this is actually what punk is. But she had to do, the reason she did that is because if she'd stayed and worked at a bar in Toronto, because she'd never worked in a bar in Toronto, and I think the way it works over there is if you're a nobody who's never worked in a bar that the proprietors know, then you really have to work what's called bottle service, which is, if you're a young female, you have to dress in the kind of skimpy crop top and the push-up bra, and take bottles over to people's tables and put up with every lecherous douchebag. And she says the thought of doing that was so soul-destroying that she would rather have just attended a bar in Florida. An interviewer asked her at one time, actually, what was it? Surely Florida was full of lecherous guys and various unpleasantness as well, but she said that she could kind of avoid it by being behind the bar, and as far as she was concerned, maybe the gun laws helped, because if people start shit in Florida, there's always the possibility that they might have a gun on them, they might get shot, so she feels like that dissuaded people. She says there was quite a lot of fighting in Florida though. She doesn't get into much detail about that, but I do love this quote here. All I can tell you is I'm a better bartender than a fighter, but that's only because I've done more bartending than fighting. Pause, but only slightly.
So where exactly in Florida did she kind of live and bartend?
Fort Lauderdale, which is like, I believe they call it God's waiting room.
Yeah.
But that's the reputation it's got, because it's got a high kind of retiree population. But that's not the standard population. Obviously, there's a whole other, community around it, which is what she was dealing with. Another quote here that I like: "I used to think I was lazy because I was only ever doing what I wanted." And then she says, "But I wasn't doing what I loved. It was only when I started doing what I loved, then I found out I'm actually a fucking workhorse and no one can fucking stop me." And I love that. I love that attitude, and I think you see that all over her work. You know this as well, because we both have a lot of experience in, albeit in Glasgow's independent music scene. But there's a lot of that attitude on show, and this is not something that's unique to Glasgow. You can go to any DIY kind of cultural hub in any city in just about any country, and there is a lot of that attitude, and a lot of it is lip service a lot of the time. And there is this idea that certain forms of music are a bit more serious and a bit more worthy, and it's the people who are really, really serious about the DIY ethos who produce the most thought-provoking and confrontational music and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, Jessie Reyez produces perfect pop music that also works on so many other levels as quite transgressive art in some ways, and she's 100% true to that ethos without any of the wank that goes with it. And that's really one of the things that thrills me about her as an artist, and it's one of the reasons
wank-free DIY.
Just become so obsessed and so enamoured with it. Wank-free DIY. That should be the episode title.
Yeah, wank-free DIY is a commodity that is seriously undervalued. There's too much wank in DIY.
Funnily enough, the Remix Project is the name of this Toronto outreach programme. And to this day, she's still involved with it. So she's still involved with helping disadvantaged kids. Awesome. And the reason she says she does it is because so many of these kids, and I know from experience, never see a reflection of themselves when they're doing this stuff. And that's why I do it. And it's like all the heart eyes emojis. So this won't surprise you to learn, probably, because it did not surprise me. Mm-hmm. But she went through a long period of depression as a young person. And it was at this point that she started to reckon with the fact that she had been, as she says, a complete dick when she was a kid, as she started to feel extremely bad at the way she'd treated her parents. And that's when she started to really internalise this idea that there's this debt she'll never be able to repay. This is one of the things I do find quite compelling about her. As much as she is, and she does say this many times in interviews and stuff, she doesn't write music for other people. She only writes music for herself. And I think probably all the best songwriters kind of do that, because I think there is something a bit artificial about trying to write a song for an audience. But what I think's quite fascinating in this case is that she has also said that she also wanted right from the start to make as much as she could out of doing this, because she wanted it always to be the vehicle through which she could repay her parents in some way. It's that confidence to just do what you want to do on a completely 100% personal artistic level, but still have the confidence to be like, oh yeah, and it will make money. No matter, I mean, even me myself, as much as I love that idea, if I'd known Jessie Reyez personally at that point, I think I'd been saying to her, I would maybe lower your expectations a wee bit. I would be like that 7th grade teacher.
I would have say, I'd have been like the 7th grade teacher, maybe telling her, look, it's admirable that you want to work your own path and you want to make as much money as you can to repay a debt that you feel you have. But if you want to make a lot of money and repay a debt you think you have, then music ain't it. Not nowadays.
Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult thing to make a living at at the best of times, and even people, and again, you know plenty, because of course you've been in bands with and performed with many musicians who are on this kind of level where there is that degree of success, but it can be really hard sometimes for a lot of these people when they've done it, when they've just finished a tour or whatever, to then go back to actually being able to live day to day, because it can be a very feast and famine type thing. I mean, you and I both know artists who've they've done a lot of impressive stuff, shifted a lot of units, they've been on impressive tours, and they come back and every now and again they go through very lean periods, and it can still be a difficult way to make a living. I hate using this phrase because of its association with the racist project that is the United States, but it is in a sense manifest destiny. The fact she believed it so much, she just made it happen. Yeah, I mean those are all the details of our background, I think, that are certainly from our young life, that I think imbue and have they've sort of blossomed and bore so much fruit in what she is as an artist. I've got notes here where I've just split up the various areas as to why I think she is. All of that said, one of the most relevant artists in this current moment. The first thing to say, and we've touched on it just there, is that Jessie Reyez is fundamentally a pop artist. I mean, she's collaborated with Beyonce now. Doesn't get much more pop than that. And yet she has all the kind of complexities of an artist that in earlier times, it seems like back in the 80s and the 90s, would not have been at that level of success. And I do feel there has been this what seemed like a myth for a long while in the age of the internet, where it seemed there was that myth where it seemed, well, anybody can make it now because anybody can put their music out on the internet. And as you know, I'm fond of saying, James, that phrase that you mentioned earlier, hashtag democratization of culture. A lot of that has turned out to be empty and kind of bullshit, because ultimately all of these things are still, neoliberalism is an inescapable beast, and corporations still own and control so many of these platforms, and they control the way in which this culture is ultimately disseminated. But there are a few artists who've made it work, and Jessie Reyez is one of those miraculous artists I think has made it work. She's never had to compromise a single thing about her artistic integrity ever. And she's doing precisely, everything she does is precisely what she wants to do. And the fact that it also just happens to resonate with a mass audience it's kind of, I know we beat this drum a lot, right? But it is the Doom Patrol thing. Like, how do you balance all those things and make it work? Because there's so many things in what Jessie Reyez does as an artist that should not work, at least from the perspective of all the received wisdom that a lot of cultural commentators have worked with for the past 20 years would tell you that this should not work, that Jessie Reyez as an artist shouldn't exist. Here's the first thing. Her work is full of contrast. For me, I would say you only usually find this in more fringe kind of artists. So I mentioned the voice at the start of this. Jessie's voice is almost indescribable. I mean, I actually, in my notes here, I've written all the different things I wanted to mention, and next to voice, I've got dash, and then I've just got an empty space, because I can't even think how to actually describe it and do it justice, because her voice is so unique. Would you agree with this, that it's impossible to compare her voice to any other vocalist?
A lot of kind of modern, like contemporary pop and R&B vocalists, regardless of like style that they're doing, share certain enunciations and a certain manner of phrasing that's really popular nowadays. Again, it's a thing I can't really put my finger on, but you know it when you hear it. You go, oh, this is something from the last 10 years, maybe longer than 10 years. To put a spin on it, so many artists, including ones that I enjoy, there's a certain nuanced vocal style that has that like Lordi kind of sound to it. I'm not saying everyone wants to be Lordi, but she's like the main example I can think of that modern pop R&B like vocal style. And I'm talking both male and female artists, like the pronunciations of certain words. It's like, it confuses me because I'm old, but it's there, and it's a thing that even people that I like have it. But Jessie Reyez doesn't have that. Her voice, if you were to compare it to anything, seems to be almost like kind of blues / classical / punk.
There is a hardness, and there is an aggression and a rawness and a real kind of bristling nature about it. But the thing is, she's also equally capable of making it into the sweetest, most soothing, most kind of ethereal voice you'll ever hear at the same time. And quite often she can make those transitions within the space of a couple of notes. And sometimes the transitions aren't always even that delicate, but even when they're indelicate, there's always something beautiful about it. And yeah, I agree. I do think there is a kind of, certainly when it comes to contemporary R&B and neo-soul, and anybody listening to our podcast knows that we are both big fans of those genres. I agree, though, there has been there's like a vocal style canon almost within those genres where it's okay to go out with the perceived boundaries of that.
We're going to have the out with klaxon at that point for our non-Scottish listeners.
Do you know, I keep forgetting that's a Scottish word. Okay, yeah. Out with, it's a word, guys. You're just going to have to take our word for it. Right?
I saw someone on Twitter saying that the Scottish flag should just be a blue background with the word out with on it.
It's a perfectly cromulent word, listeners. And it embiggens even the smallest sentence. But yeah, it's sort of acceptable to go slightly out of the boundaries of those parameters, but not too much. Otherwise, you're in danger of not appealing to that same mass audience. So, and I think a lot of this comes from, there is that, and there's nothing wrong with this. There's certainly nothing wrong with worshipping Erykah Badu, for example, because Erykah Badu is an immortal vocalist. I do think that era of neo soul, though, in terms of the vocal style of it, has had such a lasting influence on those genres that it's been impossible for vocalists to evolve beyond anything, too far beyond that. Jessie Reyez is maybe one of the first to actually do it, but the thing about her voice is that it's so unique to her, and you can split her voice into two kind of components, because there's the actual textural character of her voice itself, which is extremely versatile on its own. So even before the other component is the vocal techniques, right? So even before you're talking about the techniques, just the textural quality of her voice embraces so many different facets on its own that it's almost supernatural to my ear. And that's why, the first time I ever heard Figures, the first thing that struck me was not the vocal techniques. The vocal techniques was the second thing. The first thing that struck me was just the texture of her voice itself, because it was just so unusual. There is that bristling, almost animalistic in places when she's really growling with it. But that, actually, that's just, saying that has just made me realise Jessie Reyez has a fantastic growl, right? But a lot of people, even people who really dig what she does, that might not be the word that springs to their mind a lot of the time, because the growl she uses as a very brief transition between notes usually, and it goes by you so quickly that you barely even register it, but you notice that something happened. It's like you were walking through a blissful meadow and then suddenly you thought you heard the smashing of glass, and then you're back and you're like, no, there's no glass here, what the fuck am I I'm in the middle of nowhere. It's like a clash of elements that should not make sense because they're just not usually assembled in that way. And the fact it's used as a transition, I said this about Jessie on our first podcast episode, like, her voice does things to me that no voice other does. The way she makes her voice crack as well, which she does quite purposefully and sometimes quite painfully, it breaks my heart open every single time.
And it should front a fucking amazing metal band if she ever decided to do that.
Yeah, I don't doubt. There are there's a few songs here and there where she is quite aggressive with her vocals, more aggressive than she is with. There's a song actually on Kiddo called Blue Ribbon, which is like a sort of very messy, percussive, kind of dance hallish. It's quite unique in her discography, actually. There isn't really any other song like it. And there's a lot of sampling of her own voice in it, like just repeating different phrases. In fact, she does the same thing on the song Dope on her full-length album, Before Love Came to Kill Us, which, if there was an expendable song on that album, you would say it's that one. But there's something about that song that's just irresistible. Like, it's got this, it's basically a dance beat, but it's made up of such unusual combination of sounds. And the fact she uses her samples of her own voice as basically like pieces of percussion, she understands absolutely the qualities of her own voice and where they are strongest and how to use, and she can use them like weapons. It's incredible, man. I could probably talk about Jessie's voice alone forever, so we will have to move on. But at the same time, no matter how much I talk about it, I'll never ever really get to the truth of the essence, what makes it so absolutely sublime. So her voice and vocal style are a big part of the idea of contrast that exists within our work, but there's the lyrical contrast as well. a lot of her songs are about breakups, and a lot of her songs are about heartbreak. Now, if you're not familiar with, someone who's not familiar with Jessie's work would hear me saying that and say, well, so what? Surely that's the same for just about any pop artist. To which I say, not quite, because Jessie's breakups are always explicitly angry, and there is a ton of violence in Jessie's lyrics, like actual descriptions of violence, whether real or imagined or used as metaphors. She likes an angry, violent metaphor, and there's a lot of spiteful vengeance in there. And these things sit alongside all of these kind of just the pure soulful romance side as well. There's also what I would say is very kind of kind of sacramental. Like it's that sense of going through a ritual and being the theme of sacrifice and self-sacrifice. These are all big themes in her work as well. You know, I'm not remotely religious, right? Mm-hmm. But so much of my favourite music is made by people who are religious. And I don't think Jessie Reyez is a devout Catholic, but certainly, you know, she honours that part of her culture all the time. It is something she's very concerned with. And one of the things about coming from a Latin American background is that, you know, so many of the cultures in those countries, all the various cultures within each country, because all of these countries are anything but homogenous, but there are so many ways in which all the different indigenous customs were eventually entwined with Catholicism, and they all manifested that in really different ways, in really rich ways. That is one of the things that from an outsider's cultural tourist perspective is always endlessly fascinating, because it's a completely different version of Catholicism than the ones we're familiar with in Europe, because there's just so many other aspects to it. And there is something quite compelling about the Old and New Testament stories when they are retold in the context of Latin American indigenous traditions and customs, because where these things kind of blend together, it just makes for a whole new narrative and a whole new way, a whole new prism through which to view those stories. And from a European's perspective, it's just endlessly fascinating. And the only time I really get into Catholicism is when I'm listening to someone with a Latin American background or reading about it from a Latin American perspective, because suddenly it seems way more interesting. And I have no problem with religion. Like I say, you know, again, so many of my favourite creative people, so many of them are Christian in some denomination. And as a big fan of so many, you know, Latin American writers, Latin American artists, and, you know, I've spent a lot of time with this stuff. And despite not being religious, I do nonetheless, and this is my long-winded way of getting around to saying there is nonetheless this part of me that really responds to this stuff in a way that when I experience it done in this kind of way that Jessie Reyez does, it peels my soul open to its core, you know, and like whatever that is, whatever that thing is that I have inside me, that maybe we all have it inside us to some extent, almost makes me wish I was religious. In ways I do wish I was religious, because I kind of envy people that level of faith. I imagine that must be very comforting, but I just don't have that ability to do that. But nonetheless, I do have that, whatever that is, that responds to that level of spirituality. And Jessie Reyez has a way of exploring that without always making it clear that that's what she's doing. And it's only after a few listens. And also, and this is something I'll come to in a minute, when you watch the video for a song that she's done, and suddenly there's that whole other dimension to it that's very spiritual, and it can sometimes be very dark and confrontational in a spiritual way as well, that perhaps the song did not immediately suggest to you when listening to it. That does all kinds of things to me that I guess I don't really need church because I have this experience, and that's the closest thing I need.
You don't need church, you've got Jessie Reyez.
Right, I mean that totally unironically. It is, because it is like a holy kind of cleansing experience, and every time I steep myself in her music, which, listeners, if you're not gathered by now, it's pretty often, it is like stepping outside of having, you know, experienced mass. Like I can come back into myself and say, okay, I feel better, I feel cleansed. Lyrically as well, you know, there's also, she peppers in quite a bit. Now, she may have done this for the start and I just didn't notice. But she does now put in more political themes in her lyrics, but they are the kind of political themes that you can miss if you're not looking for them. She does make a point now of certainly using the idea of being an immigrant or a refugee as a metaphor, and it does come up even in her love songs quite a lot. And she conjures up that imagery quite regularly in more of her recent songs. And when I come on to talk about her videos in a minute, she has made more that has become, way more to the fore of her whole aesthetic now, because a lot of her videos now really highlight this. I think in times that we live in now, where we've got an ever worsening climate crisis and, the absolute apex, or nadir, if you like, of neoliberalism, these themes are not going anywhere. And, I feel like the best artists to tackle these subjects are ones like Jessie Reyez, who actually can do it in an accessible way that's entirely natural to her artistic vision, and who has come from the background that I've illustrated here. I struggle to think of, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of artists, and you know this too, there's plenty of artists we both listen to who are doing good work in raising awareness about certain subjects. I don't feel like anybody is doing it in quite the same storytelling fashion that Jessie Reyez is doing. And that's another facet of her work I'm going to come to in a second as well. I've kind of already mentioned the fact that she is a natural storyteller, but all of her songs have this way of just embracing these things as perfect metaphors, so that the metaphorical meaning of the song is just as important and just as powerful as whether it's a love song or whether it's a breakup song. It can be read either way, and both meanings they're absolutely intertwined. And you see this particularly in the Intruders video, which I'm going to mention for a different reason later, so I'll put a pin in that for the moment. But yeah, and I do feel like, see, all of these things, these very specific contrasts and the way that she weaves them together in this narrative form, I almost hate to say this because it does sound almost like a kind of cliche, particularly for somebody like myself whom is really into Latin American literature. Honestly, I feel like she's another in a long line of artists from a Latin American background who just seems to have that natural ability to stitch together a grand narrative that embraces all of history but make it contemporary, and do it in such a subtle way that if you were not even looking for it, you would never see it. But as soon as you do see it, it becomes impossible to look away from. And yeah, it's just one of many ways in which, oh man, I love her so much. But yeah, I mentioned earlier her having games of church when she was a kid. And the reason I think that's so perfect is because I kind of just mentioned it there when we were talking about the contrast in her work. But there's this idea, this constant juxtaposition of the sacred and the profane, which absolutely, certainly that echoes her voice and her vocal style. But the subject matter in her work, you've got all the romance, the love and the joy and the celebrations of community on the one hand, but it's rubbing shoulders constantly with violence and anger and fear and depression. And that thing we mentioned earlier, or rather I mentioned, that the big part of Latin American culture that's entwined with Catholicism, and the way in which Catholicism is entwined with indigenous religions, it has created this whole melange of diverse variations in the landscape of Latin American culture. And these contrasts sit very comfortably in most Latin American cultures in a way which they don't for us. As much as there's darkness in European cultural narratives historically, these things tend to be compartmentalized in a way in which anytime religion is invoked, it's a very pure thing. It's without darkness, and that's what makes it good. Whereas in Latin American cultures, it's just not like that. Latin American culture is very comfortable with embracing the darkness alongside the light, and these things are seen to be integral to each other. Obviously, Catholicism is still Catholicism. Everyone still wants to go to heaven, and every Catholic still fears hell, no matter what part of the world you're in. But nonetheless, there is this idea that the spirit world itself is more complex and has way more shades of grey in it than certainly European cultures, and certainly in North American culture like Canada and USA. You don't find this kind of thing except within Latin American communities. And I think Jessie's approach to writing about general subjects, that is to say, everyday subjects, so your loves and your romances, it's invariably touched by this same clash of elements. And it's also this kind of weird surrealism in places that absolutely exists alongside the mundane. And these elements are never really in conflict. They're just natural parts of each other. As a big fan of Latin American magical realist fiction, that's what I always get from that stuff. And Jessy is almost a musical magical realist in that way. These are the kind of conclusions I will admit you can only draw if you've really become so obsessed with Jessie Reyez's work that you start to notice this everywhere. But yeah, I mean, these are the kind of things I just find so rewarding about her stuff. We have to talk about sexuality, James.
Okay.
Because
I'll be talking about that later myself.
It has to be said. Jessie Reyez writes a lot about fucking. And if you don't like songs about fucking, and I don't mean the big black LP.
I was about to bring that Steve Albini is done with you.
Jessie Reyez might not be the artist for you because she writes a lot about fucking. She's unflinching in her descriptions of sexual desire, sexual acts, and the complicated emotions these sometimes generate. It almost becomes a mission statement with Jessie Reyez. Like, it's pretty much the first thing she talks about on every release. The first song on Kiddo is Fuck It, which is, like many of her songs, an angry breakup song. And not only does it mention sex, it also mentions violence, and it mentions them simultaneously. And this is a common thing in Jessy's lyrics. The opening lines of Fuck It actually are, it's her spoken word saying, all right, it's on, this is how I wrote it, you hear the car speeding, then you hear it skid, and then you hear a crash, and there's flames and shit, you know what I'm saying, what the fuck, and then you hear footsteps, put the keys down, and the filter comes over the beat and it swells, and then she sings, I crashed your Corvette, I heard you bitching, are you done yet, I didn't mean to, I wasn't drinking, but I talked to your ex, they said that you've been affectionate, fuck it, you're lucky I didn't roll it, you're lucky I didn't blow your brains out, fuck it, remember back when I told you that I'm a loca colombiana. And right, that's the first song that I heard in that EP, and I was like, okay, that is amazing. It's simultaneously angry and violent, and as it goes on, it's sexual also, and yeah, this is just a constant thing. The sex is often quite angry. And what I find quite fascinating about this is this angry sexuality kind of coexist with the gentle romance in a single song. And that seems like it should be an impossible thing to pull off. I don't quite know how she manages it, but she does it extremely often. And this opening with, it's almost as if to say, if I'm as frank as possible about the eros and the thanatos, the sex and the violence, then you have to believe me when I tell you that when I'm talking about love and romance, that it is just as real. Because talking so frankly about sex and violence, if it achieves anything, is it reminds us that we are physical. It reminds us that we are material. And it takes us into a space where we're like, okay, well, I think I know what this is. This is the kitchen sink area. But then when she starts singing about love and romance and heartbreak, you take it more seriously because she's just made it more real. She's made it as physical and as real as the violence and the sexual act. I don't hear that done very successfully very often. Another great example is this. The opening song on Before Love Came to Kill Us, which is her debut full-length album, the very first line in the very first song, Do You Love Her? The very first line is, I should have fucked your friends. Which is a fabulous opening line to any song, but to start your major label debut with that line, it's just fantastic. And it's also the delivery of it is just so kind of offhand. It's a very kind of, you know immediately, okay, this is someone who's just had it. This is someone who's had enough. This person is not up for a debate. This is the decision they've come to. And it's that level of it communicates such a level of exhaustion that the song does not need to detail how the narrator arrived at this point, because that first line and its delivery just does all that for you. And the full verse is, I should have fucked your friends. It would have been the best revenge for the fire that you started. I'm trying to heal, but it's a process. They told me I should cut my losses, but there's a stranger where my heart is. And I'm sick with feeling like I deserved better. And you're sick for everything you did to me. It was a setup. And I should good fella you, call me Karen, wake up to my Beretta. If I blow your brains out, I can guarantee that you'll forget her. If I blow your brains out, I could kiss it better. For anyone who does not get the Goodfella reference there, call me Karen, wake up to my Beretta. It's a reference to the scene in Goodfellas where Ray Liotta wakes up and finds Lorraine Bracco pointing the gun at his face. So it doesn't get much more violent and darker than this. Yep. And if I blow your brains out, I can guarantee you'll forget her. But I also like the subsequent line, if I blow your brains out, I could kiss it better. Now, I like that line you could interpret a number of ways. Is she saying, metaphorically, blow your brains out, as in make you realise what you've done, as in expand your mind? And therefore, the following line, I could kiss it better, you know, the conclusion being that after that, you would be able to see what a dick you've been and we could kind of get back together. Or does she literally mean, if I killed you, then you'll definitely forget her, and if I blow your brains out, I could kiss it better? Does she mean kissing herself better and getting rid of the pain she's just described? It could definitely be interpreted either way. And I love that it's open to that sort of interpretation. One of them's quite sweet, the other one is dark as fuck. And the delivery of it, like the vocal delivery, gives no clues. It can definitely be interpreted either way. This is what I mean about these things coexisting. They not only coexist comfortably, but they really complicate the possible readings of the song. Another thing I like is the fact that she's able to combine the sexuality and the violence in a way that's not always completely 100% aggressive. Sometimes it's just got a kind of a casual swagger about it. And probably the best example of that is the song Fuck Being Friends, which is from her second EP, Being Human in Public. And the opening verse of Fuck Being Friends is as follows. I got your heart in my hand and your dick in the other. You ain't scared to fuck, but you scared of being lovers. Why is that, huh? My pussy beat better than my heart do. Boy, please, you ain't blind, you a smart dude. So why you pussyfooting on this part too? It's a great lyric, as well as just the great combinations of metaphors and the nice repetitions of words. That's just so infectious. I think what I love particularly about that song is, yeah, it is openly sexual, and yeah, it is openly kind of in your face, angry, but it's not angry in the way that the previous songs I've been talking about are angry. The anger in this song is more like, it's a lot more casual, and also the way this song is performed and the way it's produced, the arrangement on it is so kind of jaunty, and it's one of her most unusual phrasings on this song, which, as we've already established, is saying a lot. But there's an almost kind of slurred delivery to this, and the whole vibe I get from this song is it's not so much someone coming up and picking a fight. It's not your ex or your current significant other coming up and picking an actual argument. It's more like it's almost from the perspective of someone who has already won the argument in their own mind, and it's kind of got that vibe with both the production and the delivery. It's kind of got that vibe of someone who has turned up drunk on your doorstep at 2 a.m. and refuses to leave. Now, I realise as I'm talking here, this is kind of thing that Nick Cave fans talk about when they talk about why they love Nick Cave. Now, you know my feelings about Nick Cave.
Yeah, you're forever near a stereo wondering what's this, what the fuck is this bullshit, and it's Nick Cave.
It always turns out to be Nick Cave, yeah. I do not get Nick Cave. I think Nick Cave is massively overrated, and I think his music is precisely the kind of thing that's made for very middle-brow broadsheet journalists to kind of fawn over as being very clever and so emotionally distant on the one hand, but on the other hand very raw. And I don't hear any of that in Nick Cave. Nick Cave's music feels very empty and vacuous to me, and I always feel this level of ironic distance in everything he does. On top of that, the man's also just a prick, but that's a whole other conversation. But whenever I hear people having that conversation about Nick Cave, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to piss in MD's cornflakes. If you genuinely enjoy Nick Cave, good for you. I'm sorry you have terrible taste in music, but I'll let you get on with it. But there is a part of me that wants to say, nah, if you want that done for real, listen to Jessie Reyez, because she does it without all the fucking pomp and all of the pretensions to high art that makes Nick Cave stuff so utterly joyless to my ear.
Which cool. We just lost the Nick Cave fans that were like 3 of our remaining
Nick Cave fans,
listeners.
don't leave. As I say, you're free to like that stuff. All I'm going to say is you're not going to be able to convince me. The reason I'm bringing that up is because I don't ever see any broadsheet journalist writing the same kind of fawning essays about Jessie Reyez. And they should be, because she's actually a much more important artist than Nick Cave. I mean, Nick Cave's whole thing is from a very upper middle class white man perspective. And I know this is veering back into this separate the artist from the artist YouTube comments territory, but you only need to have a look at some of the things Nick Cave has said about some of his political views lately to realise just how fucking divorced he is from reality. If you're the kind of person that agrees with some of the things he said on, say, or I don't know, Israel-Palestine and or the whole ridiculous spectre of so-called cancel culture, which I'm sorry to tell you, if you believe in that, it's not a real thing. Yeah, Jessie Reyez is doing all those things without having that detachment from the world, and that's what I don't dig about Nick Cave's music. There's this kind of costume that he's doing, the stuff Jessie Reyez is doing. He's making those kind of contrasts, the violence and the romance and all that stuff, the sacred and the profane. But he's doing it in this very dry way that's very detached from the world. It has a very detached perspective. It's him writing from his home in Brighton. Whereas Jessie Reyez is writing from the street corner. She's writing from the bar stool. She's writing from the passenger side of the car. She's a real person, is what I'm saying. She's not some detached persona. She's also way more relevant to the cultural landscape for all of the reasons I've already described.
If you're listening to this podcast from Brighton, we're in no way saying that people from Brighton aren't real. Shout out to Brighton. I like Brighton.
I'm going to let that one hang. No, I will say, I actually had some friends who lived in Brighton. They moved away because it was full of retired ex-NME and Melody Maker journalists who all lived in a perpetual fantasy of, the bygone days of Blairism, and so they decided they could not live there anymore. And that's all I know about Brighton.
I like Brighton. I yearn for the bygone days of Blairism. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted. Carry on.
So yeah, there's all those contrasts. To expand a little on Jessie as a storyteller, it's a role of huge importance in our culture and any culture. And one of the things that's always been celebrated in any culture is the ways in which people can encompass a culture's history and its experiences into short, digestible chunks. And I feel like Jessie Reyez does that in such a subtle way, even though she's really writing about herself. And again, it's a formula that should not really work. But each song is a story, and her work when you look at it in its totality, it's a narrative that's continuous, and it's kind of part and parcel of the storytelling traditions that we mentioned earlier that are very steeped in Latin American culture. And each story can be taken on its own, but they are all ultimately part of something larger. And she has much as said this in interviews, and she's kind of admitted that she kept a lot of songs that she'd written for her first couple of EPs and deliberately did not release them because she wanted to save them for her first full-length album. And the reason she didn't release them is because she didn't want to risk them being diluted by the way in which people these days commonly consume music. So gone are the days, pretty much, when people would go out and go out their way to listen to an album for the sake of listening to an album. And when we were growing up, James, we're old farts, right? So we used to go to the record shop and buy the CD or buy the vinyl, and that would be a big deal. Like that album would be like a meal, Yeah,
it would be. You'd buy depending on what your income was and what age you were, but you'd maybe go and buy an album a week tops, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe sometimes you get in the last 3 weeks I've bought this new album, and you just listen to it fuck on repeat, and really immerse yourself in it, and then you get another one. You're great. At the end of the year, you've maybe listened to 20 or 30 albums that you've bought. Right. Yeah. And
each one was a big deal. That was your thing. It was like picking up a novel, really. We treated albums the same way in a sense. The way music's consumed now, that has definitely been lost a bit. And even though albums are still a thing, we're definitely in an era now where shorter releases are more popular. Just because I think most people now, their first exposure to a lot of music is either through single releases and or through the form of playlists online. And so quite often there's going to be there could be a wealth of material on an album that just never gets heard. And so Jessie Reyez's fear was, if I put those songs out, people are just never going to hear them. And so she thought, I'm going to sit on these for a while. And I've got a quote here. She said, I guess I was just thinking that I was providing food for people. And if they thought, hey, this chef is nice, if they made a whole meal, I bet it would be good. You know, and that was kind of her whole ethos. And what I find interesting about when she was talking about that, it does sort of hammer home the idea that she's really aware that everything she's doing is one body of work, and that, you know, the idea of it being one body of work is important to her.
I don't know, it's kind of like, you know, when someone plays your favorite song, but they switch it halfway through, and you're bent, you're like, damn, the best part wasn't even there yet, dog. Like, that's how you feel, but nobody knows because they didn't give the song like its moment to actually breathe. It's like having a rose too close to your face, so all you see is red, but you got to step back, you got to get perspective. So stepping back is almost getting like, okay, 4 songs in and being like, oh, I get it, I get the theme, I get why this was there, I get the reference of this song into that, I get the analogy that was said in this song that relates back to this one, I get the duality, I get the contrast, I get all those things. But you won't, there's a lot of hidden things in the project, there's a lot of Easter eggs that are hidden there for the people that are actually going to step back and listen to it in its entirety. So I feel like it's that.
Another big thing about Jessie Reyez that we really have to talk about, and I did touch on it earlier. Man, she's a great movie maker. She needs to make a whole movie, because these videos, holy shit, man. As a video conceptualist and just someone who's really in charge of their aesthetic vision, one of the things I love about what she does is she continually reinterprets her own lyrics into visual, visceral metaphors that might not have even been present in the original lyrics. And she has said as much that that's the case. Now, have you watched the video for her version of Crazy?
No, I've not seen it.
So the version of Crazy that she did, the cover of the Patsy Cline song, although it was written by Willie Nelson, but Patsy Cline's version is the most famous one. First of all, segue. What a bold choice as a cover, because that version of that song is such an untouchable classic, you know, and you really have to be a confident vocalist to attempt to do that. And holy shit, man, Jessie's voice on that track. Oh, Jesus. Oh, if you've not heard it, guys, God, just do yourself a favour and live a little. But yeah, Patsy Cline's classic version is, of course, amazing. But I don't mean this as any shade, and it's going to be controversial to some ears. I don't think Patsy Cline's version reaches the same levels of pure pain that Jessie's version does. And part of the reason is because she does so much of those things with her voice that we were talking about earlier. She forces her voice into such unusual shapes. Sometimes hammers her, you know, a round section of her voice into a square hole here and there in a way it really should not work. But that video, it starts with her lying on the ground, bloodied, bleeding to death. And there's a guy standing over her with a shotgun who we interpret as being her lover or ex-lover. And the entire video is her begging him to either finish the job or to help her. And he ends up walking away and letting her bleed out. And she eventually crawls her way over to a phone, and she knocks the phone off the cradle, and we don't know whether she actually gets to dial 911 or whatever, because the video stops there. It is devastating and visceral and horrific to look at. And it's one of those things where I can see why some people would say surely a more subtle concept would be nicer for this song. But I think because that song is such a classic, I think when a song is a classic for long enough, it has a way of becoming that it seems a bit prosaic to a lot of people, particularly if you're a young person and your only familiarity with it is, you know, you might have heard it in the background in a scene in a movie once. To make the pain of that song real, I think this is the way to do it. And the whole idea of that video and the way it's shot, again, it's the visceral contrast, because her voice on that song, on that track, is so beautiful in places, and all of the imagery in this video is horrendous. but it's shot so beautifully, and you know, the design of it, she's dressed in like a flannel shirt and jeans, and he's dressed in similar. It's a very rustic kind of setting. Everything about it is just so bleak, but also so intimate, that it's kind of weirdly atrociously beautiful. Have you seen the video for Far Away?
I have not. I actually don't think I've watched any of her videos. Would you
Okay,
believe?
do yourself a favour. Just get up the video for Far Away just now. So Far Away, just to fill in while you're doing that. Far Away was originally written as it was basically written from the perspective of somebody who is in a long distance relationship, and that there is some kind of problem as to why they can't get back together. And there is a line which says the government wants us to break up. So you can infer that there's some kind of possibly visa issue, some kind of immigration issue. And when Jessie has said that when she wrote that song, she wasn't thinking too much about the implications of that line. She just knew that it was important. But when she came to coming up with a concept for the video, you see what she came up with. And the imagery of that video is, you can see there's a lot of traditional Colombian dress in there. You can see that.
Hang on, there's a TikTok advert. All right, and we're going.
And you can see that there are real visual, unmistakable references to this is an immigrant couple, and they're going to be forced to break up in the most violent way. And basically, what happens towards the end of this video is they are actually separated by what look like ICE agents. And throughout the video, there is all this, like the design. If you're looking at it, you've already noticed this, like the dress Jessie is wearing, all of that stuff. You know, it could just be taking place in Colombia, until you realise that no, these people are actually about to be violently separated, and this is a community that's about to be broken apart. And at this current moment, when what's going on in the States right now, and Christ, we don't need to get into it, but when Jessie released this, she said a few things that when people were asking about what her intention was with this video, and she was referencing the horrific images we're all very familiar with now of kids in cages and whatnot. She basically said, in a different life, that could have been me, because these are kids who look like me, and if my father or mother's journey had been slightly different, then this could have been me, or it could have been my mother or my father. And so, yeah, you better believe that this is what this is about. And that song is one of the sweetest songs she's ever released. Like, the melody is so lush, the production is like super crisp. It's the kind of song, when you listen to it the first few times, you might not even notice that particular line that comes up. It just sounds like someone longing for their lover who lives far away, essentially. After you've seen this video, you cannot listen to this song without thinking of this video. And I think it's interesting that she conceptualized that video knowing full well it would change the meaning of the song. And that's what I mean by she's just a very bold reinterpreter of her own work. It's as if, you know, she's not afraid to let her own work reveal things to her and to say, oh, okay, no, that's what this is about. And I love that kind of boldness, that kind of artistic bravery to just do that kind of stuff. You do hear a lot of songwriters who get very precious about the original interpretation of their song, about what it means to them, whereas she's basically said many times and has demonstrated many times that the meaning of the song can change even for her, and it may become something, as she says, way more important.
Mm-hmm. It's a really beautifully shot video as well, for all the...
It's gorgeous, yeah,
for all the imagery in it.
Another thing that makes Jessie really just incredible and a really important figure in the musical landscape is as a producer and an arranger, because she at least co-produces a lot of her own stuff, and just some of the arrangements in the songs are so kind of left field at times. Just when you think you've got the measure of a certain song, it can just suddenly veer off in a totally different direction, and so many of them are very deceptively simple on the surface in terms of arrangement. But it's like revisiting a favourite novel. It's not until after a few listens you start to notice the more complex things going on, and the wee production and arrangement touches that enrich the song's meaning. I'm thinking of stuff like, you know her song Gatekeeper? Mm-hmm. Gatekeeper is a really interesting song, actually, because for many reasons. It was written early in her career, and it was written specifically about an experience she had about someone in the industry who did attempt to take advantage of her in that most egregious of ways. But production-wise, one of the things that's interesting about that song The production of it generally is again quite a lush R&B type sound. There's this weird background noise that's like a siren playing constantly, and it's almost like the first time you listen to that song, you almost want to hit the pause button and look outside your window, and then you realise no, it's actually part of the song. And it just heightens this sense of panic, and it's like a klaxon almost, where it's like it's like something inside you saying, I want to get out of here. It's like mirroring almost the pain and the horror of being in that moment where you just are desperately searching for an escape route from that situation. This is the song Dear Jessie, which is one of my favourite tracks. You should give that a listen, actually. It's got this weird kind of segue towards the end, but it just goes into a stream of consciousness flow in the lyrics in the last section, and then the music changes entirely, and there's this weird experimental bit of production where her voice becomes distorted, and there's kind of a dirty, kind of ragged element to the production comes in. Yeah, it's great stuff. Her music is just full of that kind of thing. I don't feel she gets enough credit on that particular level. I would love to see what she would do producing somebody else's song or arranging somebody else's music.
I was going to ask, is her work generally, does she work with one certain producer, or on the album, does she work with a number of different producers?
There are a few different producers on the album, yeah. One of the producers is, of course, Jessie Reyez.
Yeah.
Mura Maza is a producer on it, as is Fred Ball. Eminem is also credited as a producer on a couple of tracks. So, yeah, it's a real mix of producers. Tim Suby, who is a Toronto-based producer, and he actually produced a few tracks on her first EP. He's quite an intriguing producer, actually. He does a lot of very experimental hip-hop oriented stuff, and he actually was the one who produced Blue Ribbon, which was the song I mentioned earlier that's got that kind of dancehall vibe. He produces some quite interesting stuff for her. Okay, one big thing I need to talk about, and this is one of the things for me that I just want to shout from the rooftops, that you need to listen to this artist for so many reasons, but this is a major one. Jessie Reyez is quite a radical presentation of what it means to be a Latina pop star. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of pop stars of Latin American origin from the US or Canada. In fact, this even stretches, in fact, to Latin American, Latin pop artists based in Latin American countries. There are a lot of artists who are pale-skinned, indeed white, but who openly embrace their Latin Americanness, their Latino-ness, when it suits them. And so they do like to talk about having Latin American pride, but at the same time essentially enjoying the benefits of white privilege. And there are many artists for whom this is true, right? I'm not going to get into a long list of it, but all I'm going to say is you can look this up, because there's plenty of examples. There are plenty of pale-skinned Latino and Latina pop stars, and you know, there is often that thing when it comes to being proud of being Latino. How many of them are not white? Now, what I mean by that is, when you have someone like Jessie Reyez, who is a visibly brown-skinned Latina, singing openly about her sexual desires in tandem with her romantic longings, and spicing that with subtle political undertones, throwing in all the angry sexuality, all of that stuff, when delivered by someone like her, has an entirely different meaning, and it delivers an entirely different message than when, say, Camila Cabello does it. Because someone like Camila Cabello, and I'm not picking on Camila Cabello, I actually like Camila Cabello as a vocalist, but, you know, those artists' experience of being, someone like Camila Cabello's experience of being a Latina is completely different from the experience that someone like Jessie Reyez has as being a Latina. Someone who's visibly white, it's not the same. You get what I'm saying? You get what I'm getting at here? That it sends a whole different set of messages culturally when you've got a female artist who is that free and who is that bold, that audacious. We've not reached a point in our culture yet where that is a common thing that we see. And the fact that Jessie is doing that, to me, makes her radical innately. And Jessie does mention this a lot. And she does mention being very concerned about her Latin American culture. She talks about her Colombian roots a lot, pays homage to her Colombian roots a lot. She also sings in Spanish a lot. Each of her EPs, and also there's a song in the album that's entirely in Spanish. The song La Memoria is on her album. It's entirely in Spanish. She's got a couple of others. She also did a song for, do you know the Mexican film Roma?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an album that's basically a tribute album to the soundtrack of Roma, which is one of those weird things that could only happen in the 21st century. But she has a song on that, and it really is an acoustic, very Latin American kind of folk song, and it's called Con el Viento. It's an amazing song. Her vocals on it are incredible, and the lyrics kind of describe it's. Do you know the? Are you familiar with the Latin American legend of La Llorona?
I don't think so.
La Llorona is in several different Latin American cultures. La Llorona is a kind of mythical figure who is a woman who, depending on which country and which variation of the story you've heard, is someone who either drowned her children and then has since wandered the earth crying. And if you hear La Llorona's cries, it means you're doomed. Other versions have it that she was murdered by a jealous suitor. There's various different versions of it. But in Con el Viento, Jessie Reyez she paints this picture of, and she does not mention La Llorona by name, but it is like La Llorona has run out of tears. She's basically completely dry, and she's at one with the desert landscape. And it's a really fascinating set of lyrics because it's very difficult to interpret whether it's a positive or a negative ending for the character. But it's incredible. It's a great song, and everybody go search that out because it's not something. Actually, that's a song probably a lot of people who even are into Jessie Reyez might not even be aware that song exists. But yeah, I mean, for all those reasons, particularly where the US is politically right now, and even though Jessie Reyez is Canadian, nonetheless, she is a big part of North American culture now. She's reached that point. Mm-hmm. Where the US is politically, and in its dealings with Mexico in the first instance and the rest of Latin America secondly, I think having someone like Jessie Reyez with her physicality, with her cultural background, doing the things that she does, it's a much bigger political statement than some punk band singing "fuck Trump." Do you know what I mean? Because there's way more context to it, and while it might not be immediately consumable as protest, once you really get steeped into it, you realise this stuff is way more radical. It's way more profound than anything that you're going to find in the kind of thing we found back in the old DIY days. But that's why I think she's such a valuable artist, and that's why I actually forget sometimes this is still a thing, right? But I still know some guys in their 40s and 50s who just don't even listen to pop music and did not listen to pop music in their teens because they felt there was something. It was that whole elitist thing about it just wasn't something you did. And if you did do it, you pretended not to, or you said they were a guilty pleasure and whatnot. It's this really uptight, very elitist view of anything that's popular. And I actually know guys still who are in their 50s who are a bit like that. And every single one of them, I just want to ram every piece of Jessie Reyez content into their face to say, no, this is real. They see all these messages, all this kind of political subtext and whatever that you pretend to be invested in, that you pretend the art that you're invested in is doing, this is doing it better. And it's engaging way more people. And yeah, I hate to say it, is one of the things that inherently makes it more valuable because it's reaching more people and therefore it's changing more people's perceptions. And I do think Jessie Reyez is an artist who is doing that. Even if she did not set out to do that she is having that effect one way or the other. I also have to make mention of here, as much as she's a really distinctive artist, she's a great collaborator, which is surprising because this is going to sound like a strange segue, but I always think of David Byrne when it comes to these things, because David Byrne is a notoriously bad collaborator. Because all artists,
particularly when providing his body measurements for his tailor.
Oh, hey, this guy.
Hey.
But so many artists who've collaborated with David Byrne has said he's extremely overriding. He does attempt to just take over everything. And he's got very little patience when it comes to the actual act of, hey, collaboration. And it's one of those. The reason I think of him is because he is of course a very particular, very enigmatic artist with a very specific artistic vision, and so there's that element to it. You think, well, of course he's going to be a difficult collaborator. Man, you can say the same thing about Jessie Reyez. She's a very particular artist with a very particular thing that she does. She seems able to collaborate with just about anybody and make it work. I mean, even her most mannered vocal performances and her quirkiest, rawest lyrics just fall into simpatico with other artists. It's a great song by Russ called Basement. That is a really melancholy love song. It's a kind of melancholic look back to an old relationship before success took place. So it's like someone looking back, yearning for the romance of being a struggling artist, basically. That's the male part of it. And Jesse's voice comes in, and she is essentially the ex-girlfriend who never experienced the success. And her voice sounds way more worn and way more wiser than his does, and adds this beautiful layer of irony, and it just makes this very sweet, already brilliant song so much richer. And I just don't think another vocalist could ever have had that effect, or at least it would have been a very different effect. There's just something about all the things we were talking about earlier, about the texture of her voice, and actually it's one of her more subtle performances, I will say, but even a subtle Jessie performance is always a bit weird, and it is that kind of, she has a young sounding voice, but that simultaneously also sounds as if it stemmed from some portal to an ancient dimension where everyone is a bit wiser. But yeah, another great one is Oceans that she did with Karol G. And Karol G is a Colombian reggaeton singer. She's great, actually. All of her stuff usually is pretty upbeat, but the song she did with Jessie Reyez is a very somber song. Karol G's lyrics are entirely in Spanish, and Jessie's lyrics are in English. And it almost seems like the way, actually, the video they shot for it is really simple. So it's just the two of them sitting back to back, and it's like this kind of blue light and what looks like a sort of aquarium behind them. And it's almost like, the way I interpret it, right, I totally accept this is just my interpretation. Do not take this as canon. But it's almost like Jessie is serenading her own dream self, because Karol G's voice is so understated in the song, and it's almost, the way she delivers her Spanish lyrics is so somnambulistic. It's almost like Jessie's unconscious voice. And what I love about that song is, on the surface, the lyrics are about declaring yourself 100% committed to someone. But in the lyrics, she basically says that, you know, when you're in pain, I can't sleep. And if you die, I hope I die too. And the other interpretation that I do quite like, and that I have seen other people comment on, is that it's not actually a love song between lovers, but that it's between two female friends. Nice. And that in itself is really quite radical, because that's not something we see a lot, and it's not something that's particularly highly regarded in our culture. It's still kind of looked down upon. Like, narratives about female friendship are just that whole fucking patriarchal elitist thing, that these are not valuable stories. And I think that interpretation is really powerful. My Jessie dream self interpretation was one I came up with myself, and then I started reading that other people said, no, these are two best friends, and I was like, oh, actually, that is fucking beautiful.
Yeah, that's sweet. But then so is the dream self interpretations.
She's also worked with Eminem a few times. I'm not an Eminem guy. I don't really get on with Eminem very much. I tell you what, though, man, she's probably the only female vocalist I've heard next to Eminem that sounds like she's legitimately going to fuck him up. And the songs they've done together are quite angry. They're like quite angry breakup songs, and each of them I'm like, fucking go Jessie, pan his melt. May have to translate that one for you non-Scottish people.
Punch him very hard in the face.
in yon face.
Pan his melt is going to be Jessie Reyez's next album.
I'm going to suggest that to, I'm going to Instagram her with that suggestion. There's also the Figures, a different version of Figures she did with Daniel Caesar. And Daniel Caesar is a great R&B singer, and he does have one of those very gentle male R&B voices. And it's just interesting because Jessie's the one with the hard voice. And these two sound, it's like two lovers who kind of want to get back together, but they also sound like they really want to hurt each other. Yeah, it's great. And she's fabulous at those kind of things, just finding just about any artist and making her own vision work within the context of what that artist is doing. I had a good quote here, actually, where an interviewer asked her, have you ever been in a session with a collaborator where you felt like the co-writing wasn't working? And she says, no, I always make it work. If all the songs we do are ass, we'll just release the one that's the least ass, but I just don't give up. Tells you everything you need to know about Jessie Reyez's work ethic. One of my final points here, Jessie is a natural icon. She's quite infamous now as being someone who is, she's got that appearance where it seems like she doesn't particularly care about being entirely glamorous, except when she chooses to be. And she's infamous now for never wearing a bra. Like, it's one of the things. There's always be some dude on a YouTube video, any Jessie Reyez YouTube video, say, "Oh, she doesn't wear a bra. That's amazing." And it's like, all right, keep it in your pants, dude.
Sorry about that. I'll stop commenting on videos.
For Christ's sake, James. And you know, she wears very minimal makeup, and you know, it's just kind of cool that all of the comments on her social media from like young women who just find her so inspirational for this, and it's not, you know, it's one of those things where she's not critical of people who want to be glamorous. She just makes it clear, like, I don't have time to do that because I'd never get anything done. If you've ever seen her Vogue beauty tutorial, it is incredible. Everybody, please look it up because it is so good. Vogue do these tutorials where they get a celebrity, a female celebrity, to come in and just discuss their everyday beauty routine. Jessie Reyez is about 8 minutes long, and usually in these things they get the celebrities to list as many brand names as possible because it helps Vogue, you know, advertise those things. It gets more clicks, it helps with sponsorships, all that kind of thing. Jessie Reyez lists literally 2 brand names, right? Basically, she starts it off by saying, with her hair, she just uses regular conditioner. She says, it doesn't matter what kind, whatever's around. And then she says, moisturizer. I use Aveeno moisturizer. That's the only moisturizer I use. So that's the first brand name she mentions, right? But then she says, if there is no Aveeno, I'll use whatever's around. When she starts doing her makeup, she says, I always use Rimmel concealer. Rimmel concealer is great. After that, it's just a free-for-all of... Basically what she says, I don't pluck my eyebrows, I don't have time for that, so this is what I do. And she just gets a razor and she actually just shaves the edges of her eyebrows, and she's just like, that's it, that's me daily. She scrapes away the middle edges, and she describes her look as being fake awake, and her whole ethos is as follows: as long as you do your lashes, you don't need to do anything else, because it will look like you at least slept. And when she's doing her hair up in her trademark bun, it's so funny because there's this pause. She says, and for my bun, I use water. And she just wraps her hair. She's got a fistful of water, wraps her hair up, and she just says, and that's it. And I just use whatever soap is around. And somebody actually wrote underneath in the comments, Jessie, whatever soap is around, Vogue, and it's in the alternating upper lowercase letters, cleansing bar. In that same video, actually, she says, sometimes I will blush my cheeks, but I never use blush. I do what my mom did and use a radish.
That's amazing.
But yeah, I think to kind of sum all this up, I'm going to briefly mention some song lyrics. But before I say that, it's just to sign off on what are the kind of socio-political aspects that make her valuable and what make her a vital artist in this hell show of the 21st century in which we are currently trapped. I mentioned all the things about that Far Away video. I said I was going to mention this again, the Intruders video. Now, the song Intruders is a really lush, very classical R&B song. It has a kind of Spanish guitar undertone, so there is still that element of there being a Latin American influence. When you first listen to that song, that is literally a song where it's from the perspective of somebody staking claim for their love and saying, you're my lover and I will protect you and there will be no intruders, and that's that. However, she couches it in metaphors about colonization. And so when she's talking about the intruders in question, she describes them essentially as conquistadors. And she describes the man as an island, as a land that is going to be invaded. Now, you might think, okay, well, that's one thing, making a metaphor on that level. But is that all? Listeners, that is not all. Go watch the video for that song, because it's an animated video, and the main character in the video is it's visibly an avatar of Jessie herself, and the animation is almost like a kind of mock Disney's Pocahontas style, which is very deliberate, right?
A Pocahontas, if you will.
I am actually gutted I did not jump on that one myself. So the conquistadors arrive. And the island that she is guarding is actually in the shape of a sleeping man. So she is going making the metaphors of the song 100% literal. The female conquistadors, I should add, they are all female, start planting anchors in the flesh of this giant man island, and cartoon Jessie proceeds to daub her face with the blood like war paint, and then goes to town on the conquistadors and just starts to slaughter them. And again, in our current moment, where we are finally at a place where it seems like we are reckoning with the legacy of colonialism. Way more work to be done, but here we are at the start of it. I cannot imagine a more vital piece of art in popular music than what she's doing here. And the fact that this song is so accessible, if you were just listening to that song, had it in the background, there's none of this on the surface. You think, well, it's a sweet little R&B song in the vein of your Georgia Smith, but with a nice Spanish flavour. This video changes everything, and again, it reiterates that whole thing about how she reinterprets her own work, but it makes it a very clear political statement on so many levels. It is upfront tackling all the various tendrils of colonialism as they still exist in their present forms. It's amazing. The other thing I will say, and I mentioned this a couple of episodes ago, her performance atop the CN Tower for the NBA playoffs, where she sang both the US and Canadian national anthems, and she was on there with her Still No Arrests for the Murder of Breonna Taylor mask, and she took the knee through the entire thing. Holy shit, man. She's essentially up front asking both those countries to face the lies behind their own propaganda, you know. And once again, as a visibly brown-skinned mixed-race Latina with, you know, quite conspicuous indigenous features as well, I think we have to point out. Consider all the stuff that's going on in Canada with the various pipelines and whatnot. There's so much going on there, man. I mean, she's presenting herself and her performance as a text that's confrontationally saying, you have to face up to this. This is what you are. And it sent so many messages. And I honestly don't think, and I know this sounds hyperbolic, but I'm not being hyperbolic. Honestly, I don't think there's been a more exciting political moment in music for me in years. And again, it's one of those things that no punk rock, no experimental so-called transgressive art wank has ever remotely touched on. And nothing's had that kind of effect on me in such a long time. It was fucking beautiful, man. You can take the propaganda itself, because that is what national anthems essentially are. They are propaganda tools for, you know, prolonging the legacy of colonialism. You can take those and you can perform them, but have it not be an honourable performance and make it a political statement that is completely undermining the meaning of those songs. And that's exactly what she did. And at the same time, she was also honouring all the people of those countries who want to make their country better. You know, she hit all the points she needed to hit. And it's such a simple concept. And, you know, obviously her performance itself was just incredible. Her voice was so on point. And the sheer visual of her being up there atop one of the tallest buildings in North America, it's like being on top of the capitalist world and saying, no, I'm up here, you're down there. Yeah.
Excellent. I've always imagined the national anthem of Canada being sung with a head shake. Like, oh, Canada.
I want to mention the lyrics before I stop of Great One. And Great One is a song that she wrote for her parents and for her tias and tios. And it's really about honouring her family in that way that I mentioned earlier about how she feels she owes that debt. But it really played the video that she made for this. I'm not exaggerating, man, when I say that song and that video make me ugly cry every single time. And it's the one song in her oeuvre so far that I do find hard to listen to, just because it's so beautiful that it's actually physically painful. And it's weird for me because I don't have that kind of relationship with my family. I'm a bit distant from most of my family. So I cannot relate to any of this. And obviously on a cultural level, I cannot relate to it. But the video itself, you will see it was shot in Colombia. And the scenery is amazing. And it essentially has Jessie meeting up with what are supposed to be the spirits of her dead relatives. and them eventually welcoming her back into the afterlife. And it's such a simple concept, and again, it's the kind of clunky thing that's been done in so many really obvious Judeo-Christian ways that I feel like I've seen it done a billion times and it would never affect me. This, oh Jesus, man. It's like a knife in my heart every time, but it's like the most beautiful kind of knife. But I ugly cry every single time. And the lyrics, you know, she says, I want to be a great one. I want to make $1 million, make it all my days count, clowning with my day ones before I hit the grey sun. Louis V, don't chase none. I want to make $1 billion, bring it to my pops and say, Daddy, it's what you prayed for. Oh my God, I'm going to cry already. It's fucking beautiful, man. And I think one of the things I love about that, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about how she had this idea that, no, I am going to make money doing this. And the reason she wanted to do that was so she could repay her parents, even though she feels she can never repay them. And that's what she's tapping into in this song. I'll never be able to honour my family. I'll never be able to honour my ancestors properly. But I'm going to do my best. And if that's $1 billion, that still won't be enough. But here it is anyway. It's fucking beautiful, man. And again, it's one of those simple sentiments that in the hands of a lesser songwriter, a lesser artist, I would look at it and just not necessarily think it was bullshit, but it would never affect me on this level. But Jesse's no ordinary artist. And if you don't find any of that inspirational, then Jessie Reyez will always be an inspirational figure for her very motivational quotes. And she is full of them. And I'm going to leave you with one of them as follows. An interviewer asked her, when you were growing up, did you really think that this would happen at a young age? And she says, calling back to things I've said earlier, that she didn't really start to take things seriously until she was a little bit older. And she says that when she started taking the music seriously, she just approached it as though anything could be possible, but says that the success she's had has certainly surprised her, and her younger self would never believe it. For example, she says, I never thought that one day I would be sitting straddling Eminem and wondering if he was going to get a boner. And so on that note, guys, never give up on your dreams, kids. And that's it. That's all I'm saying about that. And I think I've spoken enough.
How many 5s out of 9 do you give Jessie Reyez?
I have no qualms about rating the entirety of Jessie Reyez's discography and videography. A whole 9 5s out of 9.
You heard it here first. I think it's safe to say that the audience literally heard that rating here first.
Yeah.
And Jessie, probably, if you're listening, that is a fucking great rating. Well done.
Just to be clear, our Mr. Robot themed rating system, because I don't think we explained it. The show Mr. Robot, we are big fans. The date 5-9, it's a big date in the story. So we rate things by 5s out of 9, the maximum being 9 5s out of 9. So now you understand. I know it's obvious, but I worry people won't understand.
Well, I learned a lot about Jessie Reyez there.
Good, well I'm glad, and I hope other people did too, and makes them interested to investigate her work. And those who already love Jessie Reyez, I hope you enjoyed this absolute fangirl fest. I could do it for hours more, but who knows what Jessie will do next. Whatever she does, I know it will be exquisite, and I know I will want to be talking about it at some point. But I think at this point, I think that's more than half the bottle where Jessie Reyez is concerned.
Well,
it's more than half the bottle of this bottle of rum.
It's more than half the bottle of this wine. I'm going to need to go to the bar and top up.
Yeah, I think it's time for a bar break. My round?
Yep, we'll be right back after this short message.
This rum is going down a treat, I gotta tell you. For a guy who's working at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, this has really set me up. As Jessie Reyez would say, fuck it.
Fuck it. Awesome. Yeah, this wine's going down very nice.
So before we dive back into our next segment, is there anything else we need to brush up on here, mention on the podcast? Any exciting developments?
Are you talking about anything that's happened in the world of television and popular culture in general?
James, is this an episode of fSobriety?
Cue the music. Hello and welcome to fSobriety, a podcast where myself and my co-host Craig would dissect all things relating to pop culture, from music, movies, TV, and anything else we feel like talking about.
So James, what happened in the last week? A few exciting things, I gather. One very exciting thing I know we both want to talk about.
Yeah, one very exciting thing. Let's start with that, shall we? The trailer for WandaVision dropped.
Yeah, the trailer for WandaVision, I am 100% into it.
I've got no idea what that show is meant to be about, but I saw Elizabeth Olsen in Bronze Age Scarlet Witch outfit, and I'm here for that, I guess.
Finally, those faithful to the Bronze Age costumes that I've been clamouring for since the MCU began. Yeah, no, I really like the look of it, and I think I sent you a message saying when I saw the whole trapped within a kind of sitcom format, I messaged you and said, I really want Sam Esmail to be directing this.
The thing is, though, what happens, Craig, if that is the result of a supervillain of some description forcing them to be in an illusion?
I see what you're getting at there, James. For those who don't know what James is getting at, that is one of my least favourite tropes in narrative fiction. Is when, particularly in television, when you have an entire episode or more, in the case of Looking at You, Titans, where characters are trapped within an illusion caused by the villain, and the viewer is already aware that it's an illusion, and it's basically an hour of waiting for the heroes to realise they're in an illusion. I hate that. It's my least favourite trope. That said, the vibe I get from the trailer for WandaVision is that if that is the case, it looks like they're at least executing it in an interesting way, in a way that I've not quite seen done before. I guess we'll wait and see. I mean, I'm never going to love that trope, but this show looks like it's going to be pretty zany and pretty creative, so we'll see what happens. At the moment, I feel positive about it.
Mm-hmm. Other things I've noticed, there's a new... Well, you wouldn't care about this, but there's a new season of Star Trek Discovery.
You're allowed to care about things, James.
I quite enjoyed Star Trek Discovery, not going to lie. I'll come back to Star Trek Discovery later in this episode.
Uh-oh.
Foreshadowing. Or is it foreshadowing if I explicitly say it? Shadowing?
I think when you come to it, it's after shadowing.
Yeah. 5 o'clock shadowing that. And the other things I've been watching. I'm continuing, haven't finished it yet, but continuing my watch of Little Fires Everywhere. It continues to be a very good show.
Okay, I still have not watched it, but it is on my list.
The Witherspoon Renaissance continues unabated.
Kerry Washington is the other actress in it, yeah?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, I'll give it a watch at some point. Meantime, we have to mention this since we have been podcasting about it. I have been persevering with Lovecraft Country. I gather you have too.
Yep.
So I will say there have been 2 further episodes since last we spoke on a podcast, and I personally felt they were 2 significantly stronger episodes than the ones we covered in our previous podcast.
I believe it was episode 3 when we did the first 3 episodes of our Lovecraft Country, where we anyone who listens to it would get the impression that there was things we liked about it, but also a lot we didn't. Those people should have sat in with me when I was editing the 6-hour discussion down, where we just shit all over that TV show and edited it down to something where there was at least some sort of positive outcome.
I think you shat over it way more than I did, but certainly episode 3 I was harsh on it, way harsher than the final edit of our podcast suggests.
But I cut a lot of my own tipsy rants about it out. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad I did, because I genuinely enjoyed episode 5.
Yeah, I do feel there's a smidgen of egg in our faces, just because it's almost. I feel like Misha Green is trolling us. She's deliberately just put out these 2 superior episodes. Still things I don't like, but the last 2 episodes. So we had Strange Case, which was the one where Ruby becomes white, and then we had the one just gone, Meet Me in Daegu. Which is all about Jamie Chung's character, who's Jia. Both really interesting episodes, but I'd say certainly the strongest one since the first episode. I mean, that feels like slim praise given how we treated episodes 2 to 4. But The Strange Case, I thought, was an intriguing take on that concept. As I do every week, I look up online to see what people are saying about how it compares to what happens in the novel, which I have not read. So the stuff with Ruby does happen in the novel, and the seduction does take place, but obviously Criswell is not in the novel, because Criswell is Caleb Braithwaite, and there is no Christina Braithwaite. So that whole thing about there being Criswell and Christina being the same person, Criswell Tina, if you will, that is an invention by the showrunners. It's kind of been interested. I'm not entirely sure still what the point was in Criswell, but okay, whatever. That episode, a lot of great stuff in it. Some of it I found a bit frustrating though. I was, that I was very happy to see Ruby get a full episode because I think she's probably my favourite character. Her and Letty are my favourite characters, and I love the relationship between those two characters specifically. I wish we would still get more of that, but I was here for more Ruby action. It's just a shame we didn't get as much of Wunmi Masaku because she was in the body of a white woman. Oh, listen, by the way, did you twig that the white woman was Randall McHenchperson from episode 2?
I did not. Same actress?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I did not. I felt a total idiot when I started reading other people's commentary on it. I was like, okay, yeah, no, I did not recognise her at all. But yeah, it was the same actress. And that actress did a great job her as quote-unquote Hillary. There was definitely some interesting stuff there with, I think, with how they played the other sales girls in the department store, about how they all wanted to go as tourists to the south side. All of that stuff rings really true and really icky, and I thought that stuff was all really well played. I guess where I'm finding still frustrations with it is I don't know that I really know what the purpose of Christina's whole thing is, or if I even care. And I find myself caring less and less with each episode, which I don't think can be good, because clearly it's working towards an end game. And the whole thing between Christina and the chief of police, I just don't care. I just don't find that stuff very interesting. Furthermore, I don't know that I'm finding... Actually, I will say more about Tick in a minute when I get to episode 6. But episode 5, I was starting to feel that I don't find Tick that interesting anymore. The one interesting thing I did like about episode 5 was when he went nuts on Montrose and beat the shit out of Montrose, because at that moment I was 100% in the zone where I wanted to see Montrose get the shit kicked out of him after killing Yahima. And listeners, if you missed my rant about the death of Yahima, then our previous episode has all the ranting about the death of Yahima you could ever ask for. So I really wanted Montrose to be in pain, and I wasn't really digging the way they were trying to get me to sympathise with Montrose for the rest of the episode, albeit it was, I think, a very thoughtful and a very well realised portrayal of, I guess, how homosexuals lived their lives at that point in time.
Like, man, I was 100% here for Michael K. Williams' drag queen glitter explosion.
I thought that was a beautiful scene, yeah, and it used Moses Sumney on the soundtrack, and I fucking love Moses Sumney, so I was 100% there for that. And MKW, by the way, did you notice he did not utter a word that whole episode?
No, I didn't realise he was silent for the
completely silent performance, and I cannot sing MKW's praises enough because I love that guy. But there's an example of a great actor. He carried the weight of that character for that episode without uttering a single word, and it was amazing.
I recently found out, having not known this, that Michael K. Williams, before he was an actor, was a backup dancer for Maya.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
That's so cool.
Yeah, fantastic. So this whole thing with Gia, none of this is in the book. Gia is not even a character in the book. So there is no flashback to Korea in the book at all. Oh. That's what I've learned this week. What's kind of intriguing about this is, on one, you know how I had a big problem in episode 2 because I was like, why is Tick suddenly so comfortable with all the weirdness going on? And I'm like, oh, I guess now I know. if he had a sexual experience with
Tails from Sonic the Hedgehog,
with a Korean fox spirit, then all right, maybe okay, I'll let it go. Yeah, I've mixed feelings about the whole Kumiho. There we go. So this is a real thing. I did look at. I don't mean real thing as in it really exists. I don't have any zoological evidence to that. But yeah, it is part of Korean mythology. And I thought it was quite well realised. It was quite an interesting portrayal. I guess, I don't know, I'm going back to what I said in our first episode of coverage about this show, that I would just like it to be a bit subtler, and I don't know that I needed all what were essentially furry tentacles. And I felt like it was trying to do a bit of a K-horror thing that I don't know was the best way to realise that. It was interesting. I mean, it was certainly, it was icky as fuck, and it was a bit disturbing, certainly, but... So job done, but yeah. I don't know. I just had mixed feelings about it.
I thought Jamie Chung was fantastic in that whole episode.
You stole exactly what I was about to say next. She was incredible. Yeah, great performance, and it's a sad that we're probably not going to see that much more of her. But it was a great performance, and she's great to look at. I don't just mean in the sense that she's obviously a beautiful woman, but she's one of those actors. Her performance is just mesmerising to watch.
I really like the relationship between the demon and its mother/summoner.
I really liked that as well. Yeah, the shaman at the end. Yeah, that stuff I did really like. Funnily enough, when that scene started at the end, I did not expect to come away liking that scene, but that actually ended up really working for me.
Oh no, I just meant like between like her actual mother being the one.
Oh, sorry, right, yeah.
Well, there's the whole scene where she says, "I wouldn't exist if you hadn't summoned me." So that makes you my mother. It was like, yes, yeah. I just like the kind of the weird sweetness between that,
and it adds that kind of existential edge to it. That essentially that's the position we're all in. Although we're not all tentacled fox spirits,
sadly,
as far as I know. But the big thing in this episode, at least as far as our regular characters are concerned, is that I am now 100% on the fuck tick train.
Yep.
Fuck that guy.
His death can't come quick enough, like the death that she predicted. Man, fucking break next episode.
I hope he dies. I mean, this whole thing, this triggered me in a lot of ways because I don't need... By this point, if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you know where I sit on a lot of things politically. James, you know where I sit on a lot of things politically. Mm-hmm. You also know why this episode pushed a lot of my buttons. Like, I'm a big fan of fictional narratives generally that kind of combine this level of historical accuracy, particularly from the last century or so, and combine it with the metaphysical and the surreal. I am really big on that kind of stuff, and it's kind of what the project I've been working on for the past few years is very much in the vein of that. So this is very much my bread and butter, right? I did really enjoy that the show really didn't fuck around in equating American imperialism with the idea of being a monster. And that part I really dug. And the idea that it made quite clear that Tick, not obviously as a soldier, he is inherently a tool of US imperialism. But he seemed to be a very, very willing participant in US imperialism, to the extent that when he shoots that woman in the head, he doesn't appear to react to it at all. There's just no reaction. And it's like, I feel like you've done this before. And I'm like, eh. And then when we get the flashbacks at the end as well, when
taking part in the torture.
Gia's best friend, and he's pulling her teeth out with pliers, and I'm like, what? This is I'm hashtag fuck Tick. There is something to be said here about the way in which, if we're going to talk the socio-political aspect of it, there is definitely a way in which, as the US military remains today, very predatory in the way it really does prey on marginalised communities and poor communities to sign up. And it really pressures people to sign up. And so there's a level of comment there, I think, on the part of the show that Tick, obviously, as a black man, if you're a black man, particularly at that time, and you're desperate for an escape, you're limited to your options. So maybe the military is one of the few things that you can feasibly do. But it was the manner in which he went about those things. I'm like, I can't. Fuck Tick. Hashtag fuck Tick.
I'm not sure yet at this point in the show if you're supposed to still feel sympathetic towards him, because it seemed like there was some the horrors of war, the things it does to people and makes them do. But on the other hand, I'm like, hashtag fuck Tick.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It could be that we are supposed to just not be sympathetic towards it. I mean, I will say it has added a really interesting dimension to some of the interplay between him and Letty. Like in the previous episode, when he's saying to Letty, please don't be afraid of me, and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like this is the kind of thing that when he said that line in the previous episode, before we knew this stuff, I did think to myself, that's the kind of thing that, yes, on one hand, it's somebody who is genuinely wounded says to someone because they are so desperate at this point that, they'll openly accept that they have some problematic aspects. But fundamentally, they're a good person and they want you to see the good in them. And I did get that in that fifth episode, but this sixth episode has made me think,
No, he's just a fucking horrible bastard.
It really has added a darker edge to those exchanges now. And not only fuck Tick, but I really want Letty to be the hero of this story. And in a twisted way, part of me wants Letty to be the one that kills Tick. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I mean, I don't. Listen, I'm open to the fact, or certainly the possibility that this could be a problematic interpretation on my part. I mean, there could be. I may not have thought all this through, and somebody could come up and tell me that actually, your view is being coloured by your latent indoctrination by white supremacy and that you're not seeing it from this particular perspective. It would not be the first time I've had to rethink a certain reaction. So I don't know. The show could be doing something way cleverer that I have not quite prefigured yet. But I have so many mixed feelings about mixed levels of confidence about what this show can do well and what it can't. Yeah,
one of the characters I liked was the Korean American soldier.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah, he was a nice little addition to the cast.
Yeah, he gave that thing where he was saying that to the white American soldiers, he's just a G word.
Yep.
And then to the Koreans, he's just an American invader.
American, yep. Yeah. So no matter where he goes, he's always kind of a stranger, always a foreigner. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that stuff was handled pretty well. Yeah, there were definitely some great stuff in both episodes. And, 4 hours left. We're in it for the long haul. But I do think the fact that none of this is in the book, none of the 6th episode was in the book, does make me think, are they really deviating from the source material in this latter half of the story? Because if so, I'm kind of excited to see what they do.
Does it make you want to read the book?
I actually have a copy of the book, but I've not read it because I've not been reading white male authors, as I discussed in our very first episode. So it may get read at some point. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, that was the other thing. As I started to think about that yesterday, I looked up the episode titles for the remainder of the season, and I think it's the 9th episode has Bobo in the title, and Bobo is the Emmett Till character. And one of the things I said in one of our previous episodes was I don't know that, as much as I appreciate these references, I don't know that they're really doing them a good service by just having them as Easter eggs and not really following through with them. So maybe they're going to do something with that. It seems like it might happen. I don't see why his name would be in the episode title if they weren't. It does make me very intrigued to see what comes next. I'm way more positive now about the show than I was 2 episodes ago. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to come away from this show going, that was a great season of television. I'm definitely going to come away from it going, that was a very mixed bag of television. I'm
going to come away from it saying that was definitely a season of television
that I've seen now.
Yeah, that happened.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens, guys. Stay posted. I'm sure we will return to this subject as it seems to have sunk its shoggeth claws into us, and it ain't letting go.
Well, that just about wraps it up for this episode of fSobriety. We now return you to our other irregularly scheduled podcast within a podcast, which for this episode is the main podcast and not the podcast within a podcast.
So, James, moving on then.
Yep, moving on. We got to keep moving, as Jessie Lanza might say in her song "Keep Moving."
Jessie Lanza. Now, I believe you have some things to say about her.
I have thoughts. I have opinions. I have an opinion on Jessie Lanza. I've got several opinions on Jessie Lanza. Now, we've already spoke at great length about Jessie Reyez, and given the title of this podcast, it seems only fair that I bring one of my favourite artists, whose first name is Jessie, into the arena.
Yep, that all adds up. So Jesse, I just called you Jesse.
Jesse,
there's too many Jessies. Hashtag too many Jessies.
That should be the hashtag for this episode. If you're commenting or sharing this, please use the hashtag too many Jessies. Ideally with the number 2 instead of the word 2, so it'll be like too many DJs.
For the uninitiated, James.
Yes.
Who is Jessie Lanza, and how did you discover her?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Craig, because I have notes.
A regular Joe Rogan over here.
I'm really into this podcast, and we're going to get Billy Corgan next week. It's going to be amazing.
That's wild, man, but has Jessie Lanza ever tried DMT?
Jessie Lanza is a singer and composer and producer from Hamilton, Ontario, not Hamiltron, the other one. And I discovered her work while doing... I don't know if you're familiar with this. You may be, you may not be. Around 2013 and 2014... I had a very sporadic online radio show called Soylent Disco.
I do remember, yep.
Yeah. During Soylent Disco, I had an idea for it, which was a name, which I thought was kind of fun, where I'd just play a bunch of like left field electronic and R&B and hip hop stuff. And that was about the extent of it. And then I'd forgot that I was always too busy to actually try and discover new music to play. So what would happen is I would do the show on on a Tuesday night. And so on Tuesday afternoon, I would panic and just go through blogs and look for stuff.
Right.
I'd be like, I think this sounds like I might like it, and just play shit without having heard it.
Let's be honest. How many similar forays out there on the internet are doing exactly the same thing?
I'd like to think that it's a common theme where internet radio is concerned, and I happened to stumble upon, I believe it was not long after the release of our first album, a couple of tracks by Jessie Lanza, and I played them on my show, and I was smitten, Craig. I was smited. I was smit upon hearing her. I got her debut album, and yeah, me and Jessie have been tight ever since. Absolutely amazing artist.
So what was your first exposure to her music?
My first exposure, funnily enough, was the track Keep Moving.
Ah, okay.
Which I found, and then the next one was the song 578521, and then I believe the next song I heard after that was Pull My Hair Back, and then I got the album, her debut album, which was also titled Pull My Hair Back, and then I started to go into in depth quite a lot. It turns out not many people I knew. Yeah, turns out not many people I knew were into Jessie Lanza, but I did me a deep dive at the time. So Jessie Lanza, a native of Hamilton, not Hamilton, the other one, Ontario, Canada.
We need a Hamilton klaxon at this point.
She was the child of a couple of touring musicians who would later be DJs, and they would just apparently tour around kind of Ontario and other parts of Canada just playing music. So she was exposed to music from a really young age. Her cousin used to put on raves in Hamilton, which was like weird because Hamilton's quite an isolated city in Canada. So it would be this, I can only imagine a really backwoods rave. But apparently it was like a kind of a family affair, so her cousin would put these on and DJ at them. So her dad, who had a PA, would set the PA up for her cousin to use at raves, and she would go along when she was like 12 years old and help set up. But she was never allowed to be at the raves, but that was her kind of like induction into the idea of electronic music.
Okay.
And such like. And
sorry to interrupt. What kind of era? How old is Jessie Lanza? What gen is she?
I think Jessie Lanza
she in her 30s?
is. I think she is late stage millennial, or
right, okay.
early millennial, whatever. When you're not long after Gen X, however that would be.
For an ordinary person who would ask an ordinary question, how old is she, James?
I believe she's in her 30s.
Right. Okay.
Right. Sorry to use buzzwords there, like Gen X and millennial.
Yeah.
But yeah, so. She went on to study jazz at Concordia University in Montreal. It's one of 3 English language universities in Quebec, or at least one of 3 where English is the main language. Funny things I discovered while researching this about Concordia University is that other alumni from Concordia University include the actor Will Arnett.
Oh wow!
Yeah, our very own
Bojack.
Yeah, Bojack went to the same university. The actor Patrick Kwok-Chun from Star Trek Discovery. Yeah, told you I'd come back to that. And the TV show Winona Earp, which I've not seen any of.
I've never seen that either.
Metric frontwoman Emily Haynes attended this university as well, for fans of Metric out there. And the Pulitzer Award-winning photojournalist Barbara Davidson is also an alumni of Concordia University. Concordia University is also notable because in 2002, then ex, now current again, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was scheduled to do a talk, and there was a violent protest against it, which resulted in his talk being cancelled.
Yes, gun yourself, Concordia.
This was documented in a documentary by some dickhead I couldn't find anything else about. I'm assuming he's a dickhead from what I'm about to say. Called Martin Hemry, in a documentary called Confrontation at Concordia, which portrayed the protesters and the protest in a negative light. And which led to the Concordia Student Union suing him for his for his documentary and the way he portrayed the university and its students. So go Concordia.
No luck, mate.
Yeah, but yeah. So it seems like I'm assuming it's a fairly liberal university. It's not just like an arts university. It's got all this stuff going on in it. But she attended it and studied jazz there. Her study of jazz sort of informed her musical sensibilities in terms of just like musical progressions and taking different ideas and smooshing being the technical term for it, smooshing them into different genres and whatnot. But when she left Concordia, before her career as a musician, she worked as a music teacher.
Oh, so wow.
It's the, imagine being at high school and your music teacher's Jessie Lanza. It'd be fucking great.
That's pretty cool.
You know, that's the jobbing musician job. you teach until you can do other stuff. Being somewhat of a music teacher myself, although not a school and a private tutor, yeah, it's the jobbing musician fallback.
It probably beats flying to Florida every weekend.
I mean,
work a bar.
It certainly is cheaper in terms of financial spending, and also has less of a carbon footprint.
Yeah, that's true. God's sake, Reyez.
Would you think about the current climate before you do anything?
I've accidentally outed Jessie Reyez as the sole destroyer of the environment. How embarrassing.
Oh no, we're set. We need to cancel this episode.
Jessie is cancelled.
But yeah, her debut album, called Pull My Hair Back, was released in 2013. At the end of the year, was nominated for the Polaris Music Prize, and was also made number 4 in Resident Advisor's Top 20 Albums of 2013. So even from her first album, she was getting some acclaim, but she's really...
So, was that album released on a major label?
All her stuff's released on Hyperdub, the UK electronic label.
Yeah.
She's always had this sort of outsider pop star kind of a vibe about her, where her style of music, in particular a lot of her influences, are all very like mainstream, much like... Similarly, but less so, I'd say, than like Marie Davidson, for example, another Canadian, full of Canadians today. Where
can he get moving for Canadians?
Where what she does is it should be way more commercially viable, but for some reason it's just always in the kind of fringes. Speaking of Canadians, as we are who do that, I guess Tommy Genesis as well. You would think that Tommy Genesis, like especially now, could be like a chart-bothering mainstream artist, but still has that outsider status in what she does.
Tommy Genesis, funnily enough, and this is a segue. We'll get back to Jessie Lanza in a second. I don't want to veer off too much here, but yeah, she is on my list of artists that I would think about actually talking about for one of these episodes, because she is a really interesting artist. But I think, to just answer your point, on the one level, I think you're right. She should be kind of chart-bothering, but you know why I think she isn't? Is because even though Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion have made it quite cool now for female rappers to speak openly about sexuality, and Tommy Genesis has been doing that since day one. But Tommy Genesis does it in a way that's really way more disturbing because there's just something about her sonic aesthetic that is a little bit unnerving, and her whole style of rapping, which I know critics say it's not even rapping. I consider it rapping. But it's so unusual and just so kind of almost... she's carving her own furrow with that style, and I think that's why it's not really good. I mean, she's nudged against it though. Her music actually does appear in Euphoria, James, which you still have not watched. Starring Emmy winner Zendaya. There's another thing that happened this week. So, you know, by law, you are forced to watch it now. I'm being serious, man. If you don't watch Euphoria before you watch the new Dune, you and I are done professionally, as Christian Bale would say.
We are done.
You and I are done professionally. But yeah, anyway, that's the Tommy Genesis segue.
Anyway, so yeah, that's Canadian outsider artists, speaking of. But yeah, so the album was really well received. It was co-produced by Jeremy Greenspan from Junior Boys.
Oh, wow.
Who has actually been her co-producer on all of her albums. And in fact, it was thanks to Junior Boys that I got to see Jessie Lanza live for the first time. When I went to see... Well, we'll come to that. She released the album, and it's such an oddity of an album. It's a really oddball album, because it's very sparse, but it draws so much from, like, 80s neo-soul, funk and R&B, but kind of, like, cobbled together in a weird, sparse, isolated way. The thing about Jessie Lanza has this voice that is incredible. She's got a soprano vocal range, which is comparable to that of Liz Fraser and Aaliyah, and in fact cites Aaliyah along with Missy Elliott and Timbaland as early influences. She said in an interview that her first
Right,
exposure to music was making up dances to Janet Jackson and Paula Abdul tracks.
That makes sense.
You know, it gives you an idea of her age range then. You know,
right? Yeah.
It does. She's also cited Yellow Magic Orchestra and the works of Reiichi Sakamoto as influential in her. So that basically sums up a lot of what she's taken there. She has like 80s neo soul, early 90s R&B, and 70s and 80s Japanese electropop kind of thrown together into this mix. But
it's
her
a pretty
voice,
beguiling mix.
Yeah, her voice is incredible, which is weird because someone with the vocal range that she has, she manipulates it a lot, and a lot of her songs, her voice is through like weird processors, and she does weird stuff with it. She doesn't just sing kind of normally over the top, although she has done vocals on a lot of other artists' work, sort of as a session singer, including Caribou. She's collaborated with Caribou quite a lot. I'm not a huge Caribou fan though, so I don't know how that turned out. I've never heard the track she did with Caribou. Maybe I should have checked that out before I started talking about her. But yeah, so she said the themes of Pull My Hair Back were about love, sex and longing, and it is a very, very sexual album, but a weirdly sexual album in that it's all about sex, but also it's about being weirdly kind of isolated from other things. And she says a lot of that is about growing up in Hamilton, not Hamilton, the other one.
Hamilton, the other one.
She says it's a very isolated and desolate place. I've never been to Hamilton, so if it's anything like Hamilton in Scotland, though, apologies to anyone who's listening from Hamilton. So yeah, so I got really into Jessy Lanza then. It wasn't until 2016 though when I actually got to see her live, when Junior Boys played at Stereo, and they brought on their UK tour, they brought Jessy Lanza as support, and my God, man, I've never fangirled at a gig like that for a long fucking time. But it was great because I was there with my friend. I went there on my own because any time I've gone to see Jessy Lanza, I've done it on my own. But I met my friend Laura there, and she was like, I think she was kind of laughing at how fangirly I was over Jessy Lanza. But when Jessy Lanza finished her set, she was standing like ready to watch Junior Boys, and she was like 2 feet from us, and Laura's like, go and speak to her, and I was just like, no, I can't. I'll just like say something stupid and walk away. Like, how are you supposed to speak to Jessy Lanza in person? I'm not the only semi-famous Glasgow indie drummer to feel that way though, but we'll come to that later on.
So that album was 2013. Did you hear it in 2013?
I heard it in 2013, yep. I think it was quite a while after it was released in the same year though.
Right, so I was trying to remember because I know I only heard her for the first time because of you, but I can't remember when it was. And I did hear that album, but I don't know, maybe I heard it retroactively. Maybe it was the second album I heard first.
I think I might have been bothering you a lot about her when the second album was released. Like,
that sounds about right. Yeah.
Me bothering you, that's how we roll.
Me bothering you, that should be the name of this podcast.
But yeah, it's just like, the tracks are all just really weird, sparse productions, super sexy, very R&B and sort of neo-soul influenced. Highlights for that any listeners unfamiliar with Jessy Lanza who want to check out the first album are Giddy, the opening track, Keep Moving. Keep Moving's kind of a jam. Keep Moving's the radio play song. It is
Giddy, that's a reference to another Canadian band. That's Giddy Lee.
Giddy Lee from Rush. The song, so there's a song called 578521. Which I think I might have said the number wrong for earlier.
The title of that song always reminds me of the advert for 54321.
5, 7,
and
8,
I just always want to sing that title to the tune of 54321.
I think, I'm not sure.
There's another hip reference for the kids there, a 1980s chocolate biscuit bar advert from the UK.
I'm about to come up with an equally hip reference in a minute. I'm pretty sure that the title of that song is her phone number.
Oh, really?
And I'm assuming she changed it since then. I never had the gall to phone it, because at first I need to find out like the international dialing code for Canada and then the area code for Ontario. But but the lyrics are 578521. Call me when you want it on the phone, and it's basically about like a lot of the tracks on her first album are about like seem to have these themes of this like R&B seductiveness, but rather than being meeting you at the club and doing stuff, it's just like, I don't want to leave my house, come over. So much of it.
Come over and we can watch The Weekend kissing strippers.
Pretty much. But that to me is not the first time that an artist had a phone number as a title. Do you remember the Glasgow band Gun?
I do.
Do you remember Gun's last album before they split up was called 0141?
Not really.
Well,
no, I was not aware of this.
Right.
Is that actually a number you could contact them at?
Yeah. Gun's album title was a number you could phone and leave a message for the band, and our mutual friend Ian left them a really abusive message doing an impression of Billy Connolly.
Classic Ian.
And they split up not long after, and Ian has always maintained that he caused Gunn to split up. So fair play, because Gunn...
I did not. I cannot believe I've never heard that before. I've heard so many stories about Ian's antics. That's actually one that I'm now putting in the folder of things I want to recycle in a story at some point.
Like, I'm not sure when that album came out, but it seems like it was probably not long after we were in high school, so we're talking a long fucking time ago. But yeah, he Billy Conley'd Gunn and caused him to split up.
Classic Conley. For anybody out there who's dying to know, the album 0141 62 6226 was released in May of 1997.
Everything about her album, though, the first album, it's just dripping in like isolated horniness. It's so good. But lyrically, though, the song "Pull My Hair Back" on like a sort of surface read seems like super sexy. When you read the lyrics it reads like someone being in like an intimate situation with someone, but in a sort of shrugging, I suppose I guess if you want to have sex, we'll do it kind of way. Because it's like the lyrics are, if you want my love, let me pull my hair back. Like, it's just like...
As you're talking about this, actually, I feel like the reference earlier to Tommy Genesis is maybe quite an astute one, because I actually think they would be able to collaborate and produce something quite interesting.
They come from like... They have similarities, but they come from different enough like styles that they could...
Yeah, definitely. There's enough crossover that they could kind of reflect each other back at each other, you know. It could be quite interesting here.
Especially, anyway. I think if she was in her like softer hair like water kind of place, I think that could work really well.
Yeah,
that
I
song
can hear that
is
already.
So fucking good, man. Sorry, right.
It's mind-blowingly good. Anyway, carry on. Jessie
Tommy
Lanza.
Genesis is for another day. So yeah, that was her first album. She's released 3 albums since in her career so far. 2016, she released "Oh No," her second album, which I just love the fact that. Don't know, man. The fact that the album is just called "Oh No."
Is there a story behind that title? Or is it an enigma?
No, I think it's just an enigma. But she sort of like crystallized and solidified her sound a lot in the second album. To the point where it became her sound, so much so that her third album that was released this year...
Oh, there is actually a track on it called "Oh No."
But yeah, kind of crystallized her sound in the second album. It showed a lot of like the kind of soft R&B stylings in it for a more kind of minimal electro-funk and kind of contemporary sort of IDM rhythms I've written down here. Interesting point, the opening track on "Oh No" is called "New Ogie," and it was my alarm clock for over a year. And if you listen to the song "New Ogie," you'll be like, yeah, that sounds like an alarm clock.
I do remember this album being a big deal in 2016. Like it was one of those albums that I think all the end of year lists kind of rated quite highly, and I remember like the Quiets and stuff raving about it. Yeah,
it really, again, she made another like kind of really big splash with it, but for some reason she never seems to have broken through playing certain venue sizes. Like, I mean, in 2016 she played Pitchfork, she played Primavera, she did all the big festivals. And then when she was touring that album, I saw her again in 2017 in Glasgow, but she played in fucking Broadcast. So,
that's right, I remember.
I don't know if you remember me trying to get you to come to the gig with me.
I do remember. I think there was probably some reason I couldn't come, because I think I was quite interested, but for whatever reason I couldn't go.
I think you might have been working, maybe?
Probably, that sounds right.
It was a Sunday night / Monday morning. I think you might have had like some fuckeredly schedule thing.
Oh no,
yeah. It was co-produced again by Jeremy Greenspan from Junior Boys. Highlights include the weird scattered beats of the title track, which has an amazing video as well, which is just her cycling through Hamilton with like disco lights on her bicycle wheels.
Not the Hamilton. Yeah.
Not the Hamilton, the other one. The single "It Means I Love You" is brilliant, and I only discovered recently... I knew that it was a sample, but I'd never checked what it was sampled from. And I discovered that it's based around a 4-second loop of a South African artist whose name is Foster Manganye. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's Mangannyi. But yeah, Foster Manganye.
That seems like a reasonable guess.
A song "I'm Taking a Journey," which is fucking amazing. It's so good. But it starts exactly the same way as "It Means I Love You," because she just took the sample from the beginning of the song, but then it turns into this like really groovy African sort of funk. It's great. So yeah, she samples a lot of weird stuff. She samples a lot of jazz, a lot of like vocal samples from YouTube. She builds atmospheres using ambient sound samples and just like compresses them into like weird little, which is odd beats. It's so weird because her music sounds like no one else's. Like, It's like if I hear 3 seconds of a Jessy Lanza song, I'm like, oh, it's a Jessy Lanza song. Sort of like when we were talking about Mr. Robot, how if you watch 4 seconds of Mr. Robot, you're like, yeah, that's Mr. Robot. Because there was no real progression between her second and third album, but I'm kind of fine with that.
Sure, yep. If it ain't broke.
Yep. Yeah, and she still uses, I think, the first keyboard that she ever owned, which was a Polymoog synth that her dad gave her, which, according to her in interviews, she says never makes the same sound twice because it's broken. So I kind of like the idea of like always having to fight against your technology to make it work the way you want when you're playing live. And when she plays live, she usually tours either... I've seen her twice. Once she was on her own, and another time she had a drummer playing with her. And I felt really bad for the drummer because her click track stopped working clearly through one of the tracks, and she was just like, no fucking idea. In fact, it was during Keep Moving, which was like the last song of the set, so it was like the big end of set dance-off kind of for the audience. And yeah, the click track went, Keep Moving, and the drummer just stopped, and she was like, I can't fucking hear what I'm doing. I was like, I feel you. I've been in that position so many times. I think around that time she also released a single called You Never Show Your Love with DJ Spin, which is possibly my favourite track of hers, because like the video is just filmed outside a car lot and has, like, you know, those inflatable guys that like wave around,
the flailing arms.
Yeah, the inflatable flailing arms guys are basically like substituting dancers in the video. It's pretty great. But yeah, it was during that tour that I saw her at Broadcast, but it was a club show on a Sunday night / Monday morning, so I had to get the last train into town, got to Broadcast just before midnight, and she was on at 2 a.m, and I was there in Moan, and I was like, And for any listeners who are unfamiliar, Broadcast is like 2 doors down from Nice and Sleazy, a fairly legendary Glasgow bar venue, but Broadcast is like the Mirror Universe Sleazy's.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate description.
Yeah, it's built almost identically. But,
it is,
but,
yeah, the layout's almost
opposite.
identical.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's Bizarro Sleazy's. It's Sick Mundus.
Yes, it's the Sick Mundus.
What was Eve's... Well, whatever. That was a dark reference, guys. Netflix show, German.
Check it out.
Very worth checking out.
At that gig, I also met Paul Thompson of Franz Ferdinand, who was there with some people to see Jessie Lanza.
Your rival, the number one drummer in Scotland.
The number one drummer in Scotland's ever produced. But yeah, he had a 12-inch vinyl of his new band's album with him that he wanted to give to her as a present. And when he gave it to her, he told me later, he was like, I was so fucking nervous speaking to her, man. Like, I feel... And I was like, you're genuinely more famous than she is. What are you talking about? You're in fucking Franz Ferdinand. And he was like, oh man, I was clearly making Glasgow indie drummers nervous since 2013. But it was nice that someone else was made nervous by that. And yeah, so, but after that, there was a period of no Jessie for a while.
Mm-hmm. And
then this year she released her third album, All the Time, also co-produced by Jeremy Greenspan. But there was a review.
So the formula's definitely not broken.
Yeah, there was a review in the line of Best Fit which totally summed it up, which said that this album seemed to see her embracing her identity as an outsider pop star, where she's got her sound, she sticks to it. There are certain elements in some of her videos and some of her promotional work that make it that it's like a pop star but on a super low budget. I totally love about that. The video for Lick in Heaven, which was the first track from it, was a great parody of cutesy talk shows where the hosts and the audience get up and dance, you know, that sort of Ellen style thing.
Yep.
But it was on a fictional morning show named Good Morning Ontario, and it's hilarious because it's so well done of a parody that I thought it was just like she'd just done a performance on a morning show and got them to film it. But my favourite song on the album is Over and Over, which has the video is just a static shot in like a shopping mall of 2 escalators, one going up, one going down, and she's just kind of going up and down the escalators for the video. And I'm like, man, brilliant. She is part of my Electro Lady Crush Club.
Who are the other members?
Marie Davidson, fully. That's about the only ones. Oh yeah, and Helena Hoff as well, I guess, to a degree. But mostly it's Canadian Electro Ladies are my crush club.
That's 100% your jam.
And I was due to see her live in Dublin this year, and the day of her gig was when Dublin went into lockdown, and I didn't go to Dublin.
Oh man, thanks Corbyn. I mean, thanks COVID.
Yeah,
thanks Jeremy. Thanks Jeremy COVID.
Thanks Corbyn-19. But yeah, so I would highly recommend checking out, if you're not into Jessy Lanza, check her out, man. Because also, if you're Scottish and you've not heard of Jessy Lanza, the weirdest thing about Jessy Lanza is that she's obsessed with Lemmy.
Oh, yeah, you told me this. This is good.
Yeah, like I can't remember what it was, but there's just some tweet that Lemmy did, and you know how on Twitter, if you see a tweet by someone and someone you know has liked it, it says liked by and then has their name on it. So it was just some random like mad shit that Lemmy had put up, and it said like Jessy Lanza liked this, and I was like, what? And yeah, turns out Jessy Lanza's mad into Lemmy. So in terms of like cultural crossovers, that's possibly my favourite one of the last however many years. Is Jessy Lanza as important a cultural icon as Jessie Reyez? I would say probably not. But do I love her to bits? Hell yes I do. She is amazing. Would I have chosen a different, more culturally relevant icon to talk about
if it were not
for the Jessie-based puns? Probably. Yeah. But as it is, I'm happy to talk about Jessie Lanza, man. She is
James, I admire your commitment to the puns.
She is a tremendous artist, super fucking talented. Is like ploughing her own little furrow that is similar to stuff that other people are maybe doing, but is intrinsically her sound and her brand, and she just does things her own way, and I love that.
As far as her lyrics, like I've listened to each of her albums. I've only listened to the new one once, and I do like all of them. I will admit I've never really given any of them a deep listen, so I've never really spent much time with her lyrical content. What is the flavour of her lyrical content? What kind of journey is she on there?
The flavour of her lyrical content tends to be, if it's not weirdly sexual from an unglamorous perspective, there's a lot of stuff about kind of loss and isolation. Strange Emotion from the first album in particular. Let me consult the Hamilton, let me pull up the lyrics for Strange Emotion, which is another one of my favourite Jessy Lanza tracks. So yeah, like for example, the lyrics for Strange Emotion are just like, do you care to stay at home? Because I don't think that I can go out there. I've got plans that I can't stop thinking of. If you want, baby, come and show your love. So it's like, it's that idea again of it's very much that I don't want to leave the house kind of thing. She's she's like the introvert pop queen.
Yeah.
Even like second album stuff, like Oh No, the lyrics are just like how she needs fire, she needs light, but at the same time.
So basically, she's the sexual pop queen that the age of lockdown demands.
Almost exactly, yeah. She is 2026.
So there you go.
Sex
That
pop
was
queen,
that's your journey, James. That's your conclusion. You were thinking, how is she relevant to the cultural moment in a way that's more macrocosmic? I think we've hit upon it.
Yeah, that is actually a very good, very good observation. Yeah, she is she's the outsider pop queen we deserve of lockdown introverted sexuality.
Yeah.
And yeah, she just seems like a really nice person. Like like every interview, she just seems so nice. Well,
anybody who likes Lemmy can never be bad, especially if they're not even Scottish.
Yeah, if you're Canadian and you're like, this guy's amazing, then hey, fair play.
We have mentioned Lemmy in the podcast before, but just to reiterate, Lemmy is a Glaswegian comedian and social media personality, and has a very typically Glaswegian working class accent. So his video content and whatnot, people outside of Scotland, it can be difficult to understand. So I'm quite impressed that she's able to even engage with that stuff. She seems like a good soul.
She seems like a good egg. One of Canada's finest. What we've been discussing today mostly is Canada's finest. We've talked about Tatiana Maslany.
They talked about Tatiana Maslany in a segment which was subsequently edited out, because in the time since recording, the actress denied rumors she had been cast as She-Hulk.
Talked about Jessie Reyez. We talked about
you're
Jessie
right,
Lanza.
yeah. Is there anybody else we've forgotten? We might as well mention them here while we're here.
Right, who are good Canadians? Bring them up. Line them up.
Hashtag good Canadians. Fuck, my mind's suddenly gone blank.
I'm sure they're out there.
I'm sure. I know there are more good Canadians
than the 5 that we've talked about today. Listeners, if you know any good Canadians, why not leave us a comment with hashtag my favourite Canadian, and we'll be sure to respond.
Yeah, that's a subject for another podcast. Good Canadians.
I think this was it, man.
Yeah, we think we fulfilled that quota.
Yeah, but so yeah, that is my never-ending adoration of Jessie Lanza, and I would highly recommend that listeners out there should go and get their fill of Jessies. Get your Jessie Reyez, get your Jessie Lanza. For the record, if I haven't made it clear already, Jessie Lanza is Jessy, though.
As we would say here in Glasgow, get them Jessies round ye.
Yeah, big Jessie.
Yeah, we do say that too, and that's not a compliment, so ignore that last one.
Yeah, I'll maybe cut that out.
Contrary to this statement, he did not.
Yeah, when you were talking there about the gig you did not go to attend, it is just, man, it's bringing back all the pain of knowing that you and I were both meant to attend Jessie Reyez this year. Back in May, it was supposed to be. In the early days of lockdown, when it seemed like lockdown might not last very long.
Maybe this is like a good, like why we've had to talk about Jessie and Jessier.
Could be a cathartic process.
We both missed our Jessies thanks to COVID.
I think it really breaks my heart about that though is I might never get the chance to see Jessie Reyez in as intimate a venue as that now, because that would have been pre her releasing Before Love Came to Kill Us, and I think what's happened since, I don't know if she'll play a venue that small again.
No, she's like arena levels now.
But she's mine. I mean, you guys can play, that's fine, but she's mine. It was the one chance. And I remember being aware of that at the time when I was looking forward to that gig. I was like, yeah, this will be that one time. Like that time Sarah talks about when she saw Solange at XOYO.
Yeah, that one golden moment.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well.
Oh, no. Well, I think we've really talked about the Jessies. Why don't you, not you, Craig, because you'll have to, but dear listener listening at home, why don't you feel free to join us next time when I believe we're going to try and steer this podcast train back onto some sort of themed track.
I think what James is trying to say is for you guys out there who have been following us and have been hopefully enjoying our TV show coverage, our next episode we are going to be talking about season 4 of Fargo. That's the plan anyway. It airs this coming Sunday as we speak at the time of recording, and it's 2 episodes back to back, both written and directed by Noah Hawley. And James, you've never watched Fargo, is that correct?
That is correct. My only experience of Noah Hawley is his work on the much underappreciated by us on our first episode of fSobriety, Legion.
Yeah, Legion was just shy of being one of our Holy Trinity, and perhaps if Doom Patrol hadn't happened, it might have made it. But yeah, he was Noah Hawley was the showrunner of that show, as I'm sure many of you are aware. And Fargo is his other show that he is a showrunner on. The good thing about watching Fargo, James, is you don't need to see any of the previous seasons because it's a brand new story season. So I think it would be a good show to jump into, and hopefully, if it turns out well, then it'll give you a thirst for watching the earlier seasons, and it'll be something fresh for us to talk about that isn't Lovecraft Country. So that'll be good.
Yeah. Fantastic. We're going to get in about Fargo.
So that's what's on the horizon, guys. So those are things to look forward to. Hopefully Fargo should be some kind of a hoot. And even if not, we're always going to have a good time, Mr. Roboting.
But just before we finish, I should have said this at the opening of the episode. Apologies again for the sound quality from my microphone in episode 4. As I'm sure the Hamilton explained to you, I had desktop computer fan issues.
So it's this technology. If only we had a sound engineer.
Yeah, I feel attacked. But yeah, so that is what we've got coming up on fSobriety. That has been A Tale of Two Jessies, or Jessie and Jessier, if you will.
And I think that has definitely been 2 separate halves of 2 separate bottles.
What is up? fSobriety Episode 5, Jessie and Jessier, was conceived by Craig Woods and James Hamilton, edited by James Hamilton, and is a production of Half the Bottle. The theme music is Colossal Estates by Errors, available on Rock Action Records. Comments, questions? Find us lurking in your favorite social media if you have such a thing, on Twitter at fSobrietyCast, on YouTube one of these days at youtube.com/fSobrietyPodcast, and on Facebook, sorry Mr. Esmail, at fSobriety Podcast. #FuckTick.